Good morning, everybody. I've been told to start. I can't see how many of you are here yet, but I'm hoping there's enough of you for us to start this exciting conference this morning, brought to you from a rainy Norfolk. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Sarah Steed, and I'm the Director of Innovation and Engagement at Norwich University of the Arts. You're very welcome to join us this morning. This morning's conference is all about planning for the future that it's hard to see. And it comes as part of a broader project that the university has been engaged with for some months now called Connecting Creative Capability. And the idea behind Connecting Creative Capability is really about how often the importance and the value of creative and design thinking can be overlooked in different sectors of the economy, and yet it's something which is really important and in our view at the university, certainly more important now than ever. So we spent last year really during the pandemic working with businesses to understand what kind of challenges they would like a creative community to help them to overcome. And we came out of that with three themes. And this is actually the third of the three conferences that we've run along these lines. The first one was about problem solving, and that's something that we undertook with our film production team to share the way that we go about problem solving and to share those kind of methods and thinking practices with other sectors. The second one was about innovation that I think a lot of businesses have found quite difficult in the virtual space. You know, it's difficult sometimes to get the spontaneity and to make the connections that you need to for innovation within that space. And this third one is really about planning for different futures and to, really undertaking that type of planning process that accepts uncertainty and recognises it, but holds lots of different multiple versions of what the future might look like in your head at once. I think it's come about largely because a lot of businesses told us that they felt like the pandemic was a huge rug pull. You know, they had no idea that this was round the corner, and they've almost sat there and said, well, gosh, you know, how would you even embark on a strategic planning process, given what we all know now could be just around the corner? So I'm hoping that the perspectives that we hear today will really shed some very interesting light on that. The second part of our project, after all the seminars are closed, is that we have opportunities for our graduates to go out in funded internships into all sorts of different organisations in September. And one of my colleagues will be talking about that in some more detail later on. But if you have to leave the conference early and you're interested in hosting an intern in the autumn, do please get in contact with us, because that's absolutely a possibility and we're planning it right now. So I think that's enough from me. I'd like to hand over now to Marie Brennan, who is the leader of all of our master's courses at Norwich University of the Arts, and who is today's chair and organiser. So over to you, Marie.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for turning up. I think what we're doing and why we wanted to bring this knowledge exchange conference together was to help us put our imaginations to work and to deal with the rapid changes that humanity and our planet are facing, really, and to think about what we can do in our enterprises, in our studies, in our communities, to look at how we can deal with all of these changes that are happening and that we've been facing over the last few years. We've got a climate crisis, there's political instability, there's a civil rights movement, and of course we've got the pandemic. This period of change, of course, requires us to innovate, but sometimes we don't feel like we've got the energy to innovate because things keep changing and we feel like we're turning and moving in different directions and pivoting in the same space continually. But if we put our imaginations to work, we can see that in crisis, there's often opportunity, which is what we're wanting to explore today by bringing a bunch of really good creative speakers to you to share their ideas of how they work. So that's what we'll be doing today, sharing some ideas from our own networks within Norwich University of the Arts, and sharing inspirational thought leadership. There'll be, as we say, chance for you to kind of ask questions with this as well, because I know some of you are from creative industries and some of you aren't, but we do have this thought leadership from some stellar speakers today. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Josie Warden, the head of regenerative design from the RSA, can't be with us. But I would urge you to visit the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA website, and read the blogs from Josie around implementing a change agenda. There's a whole heap of information there. There's toolkits to use about change. So I'd really welcome you doing that. I think you'll find it very useful. However, in the spirit of the day and rapid change, I'm delighted to say that heroes don't always wear capes. And I'm delighted and actually exceptionally grateful to let you know that Mary Carty has bravely and rapidly stepped into the breach. And we'll be sharing her innovation expertise within industry, creativity and culture. So Mary is somebody I've worked with before when I lived in Ireland, when we worked on an MBA together, teaching on an MBA. And Mary is an international entrepreneur with a background in arts, education and technology. She's director of a global consultancy firm called Wilson and Keys and deals with things like global technology and creative industry matters and has a whole wealth of clients. Mary sits on the board of the Science Gallery International and also Brana Theatre de Fosti, and has recently been appointed to the funding advisory panel for the Western Development Commission in Ireland. Mary was the founding executive director of the Blackstone Launchpad at NUI Galway, and is co-founder of Outbox Incubator, a STEM-ETS initiative for young women in the STEAM fields, for young women aged 11 to 22. Prior to that, she was CEO of BAFTA-nominated agency Spoilt Child and board director of the Irish Internet Association. So we're really thrilled to have somebody with such massively wonderful credentials with us today. So Mary, you've got both an arts and a technology and a business background. And so I'd be delighted to hand over to you now to talk, for your talk, creativity, industry and culture. Thank you.
All right, I'm sending greetings and good wishes from a very sunny Bettystown in County Meath. And as you can see, I'm here in my living room, like so many of us these days. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. So today I would really like to speak to this notion of creativity and culture and industry, and where do they overlap? Where do they interconnect? And what can we do? So we will talk today then about, well, why creativity and why now? Surely it's always been important. Why do we need to double down on this notion now? I'm also going to talk a little bit about the new EU Bauhaus, specifically the approach that they've taken to co-design. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about that transformative power of collaboration, and then a little bit about culture as a driver for change. So are we ready? All right, so why creativity and why now? Well, I think that because of the situation we are in the world right now, and Marie, you alluded to a lot of the problems that we have a whole host of problems. And our business as usual, how we put things together, how we make things, our models, our systems, they're broken, and we know that they're broken. And for a very long time, I think our inertia in a sense, and our fear, and also I suppose because for so many of us, our industries have been siloed so completely that it's incredibly difficult to actually connect the dots between science and art, or business and literature, or science and creativity, or business and creativity. And that's a shame. And that's one of the things that we have to address. Now, if we're going to do that, we need a whole host of skills to be able to reconnect these dots and break down silos, and have conversations that will enable us to start to think about and then address the things that we need to do. That's not easy, as we know. So right now, many of you will have come across the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're a wonderful idea. Things like peace and justice, climate change, industry innovation, all these things that are going to help us, I suppose, create and build better than we have, because we do know that development comes at a cost. And unfortunately, how we've built, particularly the Western world, is very much transactional. And I suppose some have profited and others haven't. So many of you will be looking at different pillars in the Sustainable Development Goals around what you do. And many of the initiatives that we're talking about at the moment globally with the UN and many, many others are talking about how we can implement these in business, in education, and in our lives together. Now, I'd like to bring your attention to the Earth Charter, and I don't know if many of you have come across it. So the Earth Charter has been endorsed by UNESCO, and it's been around since the 90s, and it has this most incredible way of people coming together over the last 20 years or more to actually write this charter, which is the fundamental underlying values and principles that will help us live in a more just and sustainable and peaceful world. And I think that's incredibly important, because if we are going to build different types of innovations based on creativity, based on need, based on the problems that we have at the moment, based on unmet needs, and also based on the fact that many, many times we do not include voices of people we should, then I think having a look at the Earth Charter is incredibly important. So as you can see there, the pillars are respect and care for the community of life, ecological integrity, social and economic justice, democracy, non-violence, and peace. So if we're going to build the future, we really need to think about these things. So I think it comes back to values. Who are we? What do we believe in, really? What do we believe in? And then what are we willing to take action on to really drive change that is meaningful, that connects deeply, that understands that we are all interconnected. And if one of us does badly, all of us, we all do badly. And I really love this Jasper Johns painting, so I'm very sorry that I've just taken a section of it. But if you know this painting, 4 heads sits on top and looks down. And I think about this painting a lot, because I think that for a very, very long time, our creativity, our inherent creativity as people, we've kind of forgotten that it's there. Doesn't mean it's gone. It doesn't mean we can't access it. It just means maybe we just haven't looked at it or given it some time and space. I also think that for creative people and artists, creatives and makers and people who maybe don't even call themselves such, our sphere of influence is wider and greater and deeper and broader than we have given it credit for a very long time. So in essence, I guess what I'm saying is our time has come and we need to use this power for good. I also think it is our opportunity and our privilege to connect and make deep and lasting relationships with other industries and bodies and thought leaders, and to actually be that connection and be that bridge and to hold that space for some very difficult conversations, because as we know, creative people and artists have done this for millennia. This is what we do. And I think that's both incredibly important, incredibly exciting, incredibly invigorating, but we cannot do it on our own. For any of you who have thought about or studied systems thinking, I think systems literacy is one of the most important things for us to understand right now, whether we're in business, whether we're an organization, whether we're an individual, a founder, a business owner, a startup founder. We need to really understand the importance of systems, because all of this is a whole. We are a whole. So at the very basic premise of this, a system is you go to the shop, you buy something from the shopkeeper. That's a system and it works beautifully. Take one of those away and the system falls apart. Systems are complex. Some systems are very simple. And then if we think about the whole life system in terms of the planet that we live on, it's complex. And for a long time, when we build new products, And somehow, I think at a certain point, we thought that technology will save us. And it has. I mean, look at how rapidly science has come to the rescue, and imagination and creativity to create vaccines that I actually got last week. That's incredibly, it's amazing. It really is. But we need to understand that we cannot continue to make and build things that will fundamentally break the system that supports our lives and the life of the whole community. So I'd like to give a few examples now about how creative thinking can be taken into a whole new level. I'm sure many of you have applied for European funding for a whole host of things over many, many years. And for any of you who haven't applied in European funding, I'm sure you've applied for a business grant or something like that, or a feasibility study. So we know what grants look like, don't we? There's a form, you fill it out, you fill it 1 to 10, you make sure you have every piece in it, and then you hit send. That's generally how it's done. It's formulaic, one size fits all, and well, you do the best you can, and you hope you have the language to answer the questions that are put on that form. Okay, so how is the new European Bauhaus different? In this case, they had what they call a co-design phase that is literally just finishing up this week. What does that mean? Basically, citizens, organizations can put in their ideas, their examples, and their challenges into a portal and actually write what is meaningful to them. What is a challenge that is really something that should be considered and acted upon? Is there an example that people have been involved in or seen or noticed at some point that could actually solve these problems in the world? So what is the new EU Bauhaus? Well, the European Union have just announced this new European Green Deal. And of course, we know that we need to get to carbon neutral incredibly quickly, retrofit, look after our buildings, and live in a more sustainable way. And this program, the new European Bauhaus, basically will enable the new Green Deal to happen through culture. So using creativity and conversations and co-design and conversation, dialogue, to bring people together from places and spaces and organizations and people that usually do not get heard. And I think as a process and an approach, I think this is very powerful. And I really believe we're going to see more of this type of engagement with all sorts of both local, national, international, and global conversations as we move forward. We need to, because we need to involve more people, and we need a little bit more creativity, a little bit less rigidity, and I suppose a way to bring people together in forums that are not usual, the way we've always done business. Now I'd like you to meet two wonderful young women. They're from Galway, so please meet Izzy and Alva Keane. Alva is standing there, and that's Izzy in her beautiful wheelchair. And this project came from Alva's final year presentation in our college. Growing up, Izzy and Alva love colour, as you can see, and they love fashion, and they're really bubbly and engaging and just wonderfully passionate people. And Alva always felt that Izzy's wheelchair didn't really represent who she was. And she wanted something to change that. And the wheelchair, of course, is power, it's independence for Izzy. And Alva created in her final year project, wheelchair covers. And the business has since gone on to be global. And as you can see, this business has sourced and acquired partnerships with Barbie and Hello Kitty. And you'd wonder why things like this hasn't happened already, but to have a Barbie in a wheelchair for a young child like Izzy is incredibly powerful, because when she was growing up, there were never any toys or dolls that represented her. And now with Barbie making, this model and using the wheel covers, it's It's a really powerful statement. The other thing that's important about this business is the fact that collaborations happen with artists and designers across the world. So conversations about inclusion, disability, color, fashion, all these things that make people who they are and give us life, energy, hope are included. And I think this is a really powerful example where a business can transform themselves by having conversations, often with people who are very excluded. So Izzy Wheels, keep an eye out for them. And if you see a wheelchair cover like that going down the street, chances are now you know where they came from. So in business, we always talk about this customer journey, you know, where we bring people in at the beginning and we try to tell them a little bit about us and sprinkle some fairy dust and hope at the end that they become a champion for us and they buy from us again. And they tell other people about us. But there's something fundamentally missing in the heart of that model. We've actually forgotten to build deeper and more meaningful relationships. It's still incredibly transactional. So to build a business that's based on values and meaning and relationship, now you've got advocates, now you have champions, and now you're pushing the needle for change. What are we after? We're after insights. Because we have to get out of the building. And as crazy as that sounds, and it sounds so simple, most of the time we sit here in our chairs with our desk and our computer, and we don't get out of the building. And we forget that we need conversation, and we forget that we need to actually understand deeper. And we forget that we need to give this more time. We need to reflect, and we need wisdom. We need to pull from that pool of wisdom that comes from people out there bigger than ourselves. So what's next then? I think creativity is fundamental. I think that we all have it, and I would absolutely advocate and say that any business who thinks they are not creative, I am telling you, there are people in your organization who really are. And all you have to do is ask, bring people together, have a conversation, ask them, what is the thing that's bothering you the most today? Have you noticed that something doesn't work? Well, then how can we change that? And give people the autonomy and the power and the opportunity and cheerlead them on to help you fix it. Because when that happens, then that builds this virtual process where people support each other to enable and help and want to build something that's meaningful, joyful, and interesting and challenging. And then you retain people. And then they tell other people, you know what, you really need to work here because this place is awesome. The thing is, we are all interconnected. That is the way it is. And we have to look after the whole community of life. Humans are not the top of the pyramid. We thought we were. Well, now we've got a little jolt to remind us that we're not. So if one of us suffers, we all suffer. So we need to come together and think about that whole community of life and what we want to build. So change then. Yes, it's inevitable. This year has been particularly horrible. But I think from this year, many of us has had time to reflect, to understand and to think about what is the most important thing for me. Why do I do what I do? Who am I? What do I believe in? And what am I going to do next? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was fascinating. I think it's also something, the whole of the talk was just what we needed to hear right now, I think, across the world in the business and creative economy community. I was really particularly taken with the idea about the systems thinking, how we need to think of that as an ecology now, and to think of ourselves in a post-transactional world, that it's not just about the transaction that you were talking about in the shop, but it is around our community building. It's about the collaborations. And I think that was a really fascinating talk. So I want to say thank you for that. We've got some chat here, so I will open that out and then see if we've got any questions. So if you have any particular comments, I was really taken with the Earth Charter. I also really like the visuals that they put together. That's my design background. I thought that worked really well.
It's also, if you go to the Earth Charter website, you can do an introductory course that takes a couple of hours to learn about the Earth Charter and the underpinning values. I would definitely suggest that. It's very, very inexpensive and it will take you a couple of hours.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good top tip. We've got a question come through about how did the connection with the new European Bauhaus start?
Basically, it is Ursula von der Leyen, president. It's her initiative. And last September at a summit, she spoke about building a better Europe, and that Europe needs to be more sustainable and transformative, and we need to work in collaboration, and business as normal can't continue. And because the new European Green Deal, the targets around carbon and climate and retrofitting buildings, 85% of Europe is already built. So there's a massive problem. And the other conversation about the new European Bauhaus is it doesn't rest only within the borders of Europe. They are also looking for partners in other countries across the world. So this conversation is ongoing, and I would definitely say to all of you to keep an eye on it, because it's going to shape a lot of policy, and I suppose how others and other countries react to this. And I know in the US, President Biden and his council have a similar conversation going on at the moment. So this is an evolving conversation about how we can all work together.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, later on today, we've got Mathieu Vrijman from the Kultivator, kind of agricultural art and farm, who's talking about a collaborative process across science and arts, but using UN's Agenda for Change for 2030, which has brought that collaboration together. So this will be a theme through the day, is what I'm finding. So thank you. A couple more questions. Do you have contact details for the wheelchair cover designers?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, you had your contact details up on the screen, but somebody teaches art to children with complex needs, and they'd be great to let them project relate.
I will write it in the chat right now.
Thank you.
Keep going with the questions. We can double job.
Multitask. The next question is about an initiative such as appreciative inquiry in institutions. Is that something you've heard about, and does it tie in with the things that you were discussing?
I think so. I think it's very much, to me, about values, and it's about how we interact and understand each other's perspectives and realize that not only one of us has the answer. So for me, all of this comes back to values and how we actually start a conversation that's respectful, because it needs to be, and how do we open that space? Really, that's what it's all about. So I'm loving to learn more about it, but yes, I've come across it, and I think, to me, that's the underpinning philosophy of it.
And we've got a question here from Sheila. You might not have the same situation in Ireland, but the question is about how do you feel about the way opportunities for creativity are being reduced in education at pre-university level? I don't know if it is the same in the secondary schools there, or if creativity is increasingly valued in business, because there's kind of creativity, as you were saying, in business is becoming more and more accepted, and that the idea of creativity as being a preserve of an artist is now being lost, that creativity can be in any kind of thing. You can be a creativity expert within insurance, as we were talking about. But so if we are valuing creativity, but it's not coming through the education system, how can we get that message into a curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. What absolutely astounds me is over the last 5-8 years, you can see design thinking programs pop up in so many places. And you can see innovation labs happening in the big 4, big 5, accounting, insurance, whatever companies. So to me, that seems really crazy that we kind of leave it in the primary side and secondary side, and then all of a sudden, when people hit 18 and they go to college and get a job as an intern, they're expected to be creative. This is a huge problem, and I'm seeing this not just in Ireland and the UK, but this is actually a global problem where we have, I suppose, misunderstood the value of creative processes, play. And we front loaded our education systems with so many other things that we've actually not given time for reflection, play, fun, all those things that you need to do. Mistakes, getting things wrong. So I think part of it is it's absolute advocacy. It absolutely is going in the policy level. It is basically fighting to put back drama and singing and all those things back into our curricula again, both at primary and secondary level. And actually what is going to happen, and I've seen it happening already, you now have industry advocating education to put this back in, because now they know it's missing. So in a funny way, industry will be incredible allies to help creative practitioners bring creativity back to education. But we all have to have a voice and say we want it back. It needs to be there.
Thank you. That was great. I mean, it's we've got a question above that one, but I thought that would be, and it has kind of semi-related to the question here, is what are the challenges and difficulties that business experience in adopting a kind of values-based approach from your perspective?
Yeah, for me, I think it comes down to the very early days when a company sets up. Because that culture that you create as a founder and your first employee stays. It rests in the company, and it's very difficult to change after that. So I think probably lesson 101 is to understand that the culture you create on the first day, that's going to be the culture. So you just have to be mindful about the messages that you send out, the language that you use, how you write your emails, how you speak to people. We all have biases and stereotypes. We do. Be mindful of them. Understand that if you want to have a diverse team, for example, you need to hire a diverse team from the beginning. It's no point if you've got 7 people already on the team and you only then start thinking about it, because then the culture is set. I think businesses have been incredibly good, in so many ways about figuring out what their values are too. And I think, these things are not set in stone. People need to reevaluate where they're at after however many years in business. And I think you do that with your team. And I think you make that a regular conversation, not just your strategy day. It's about a values day. Are we really living our values? How are we doing it well? How can we do it better? And you see, that's scary. And I completely get that, because, we need to be doing business and we need to pay everybody's wages, and we need to make sure that you can pay your mortgage and your childcare and put fuel in your car. But you're not going to retain people anymore, because we are in a transitionary period, and many people have called this period the Great Turning, where we're moving from a high carbon, very high transaction, consumerist conversation to a more, I suppose, open, sustainable conversation. And we can see this with young people, and I'm sure the young people that you teach every day, they are incredibly aware of what's going on in the world, and they want to see things being done differently. And I think a whole lot of businesses are responding to that. So yes, it's scary, but you really need to sit down and have these conversations and be honest. And if you get it wrong, that's okay. That's really okay. You know, we can move, we can shape it, we can make it better.
I mean, that it's relating, thinking about work and the thing you were saying about play and joy and being free to make mistakes. I think Ken Robinson, rest in peace, had that famous saying that if you're not prepared to do anything wrong, you won't do anything right. And I think the idea about the great turning, the great reset on the World Economic Forum, I can, you know, although we've got some horribleness, as you were saying, there is a real kind of, you know, green shoots, I suppose people are calling it. And I can see that happening through these kind of approaches. And for those of you, I used to have a friend who worked in media, and she worked for a TV company in audience development. So she was out of the office quite a lot. But it was a rule, and this is part of that thing about your talk about culture, that everybody had to be back in the office on Friday afternoon. And because it was around children's TV, games were bought in and they were put in the place of like thinking how a child would see these toys. What was a child thinking? So that their children's TV programs would really think about the culture of what children were doing at the time. So I think that's a really important thing.
There's another point there, and you know, if your market is children or young people or whatever, do you have them on your advisory board? Are they on your board? How often do you speak to them? And I think if you are working with children and young people, you need to bring people in to help you to do that, and to facilitate those conversations and that relationship in a really meaningful and ethical way. But so many times, I mean, I can see this on boards of organizations, you know, our mission is to. There's nobody that represents that voice anywhere in the organization. So that's something I think to be really mindful of. How can you actually bring those voices? Because you can't be 5 when you're 40, you know, if it's 5-year-olds you're working with. A 5-year-old is probably going to take that and throw it across the room and go, wow, how'll that bounce off the window? You know? So we've learned not to do that, hopefully, most days.
Not break the window.
Not break the window.
Yeah, I mean, that idea of, I think it's also is that idea about bringing the joy back. You know, we spend so much time at work, or we have done, and we've had that, you know, through the 80s and 90s, the idea of busyness as a culture, and always like working longer hours, always having that badge of look how hard I'm working, you know, I'm trudging. And I think the idea about breaking that drudgery away, and the fact that whatever realm of work we're in, it's important work. And I think it's bringing the idea back about that we're doing something important. And as you talk about that hierarchy before about humans at the top, and actually it is an ecology. I think that's with work as well. We tend to kind of fetishize certain professions over another. And so I wanted to know what you kind of thought. Would that help kind of change a value? Because it's often in businesses, there's only certain people who are allowed the creativity. Whereas if we allowed our, you know, people who are administrators or cleaners to get involved with creativity, would that help create?
I am a massive believer in that everybody's voice in an organization carries equal weight. Because, I mean, think about COVID and all the wonderful people who cleaned our streets and cleaned our hospitals every day. I mean, we suddenly got a knee-jerk reaction as to what happens when the person in Tesco gives us her, you know, sells us her food. We forgot that every person is important, and we forgot that every job is important. We forgot that. And I think part of this reset for me is that by understanding that we cannot cap anybody's ambition, we have no right to do that. And depending on where you are or what job you're doing, that's valuable and needed. And your insight could be the thing that unlocks something really important. But it shouldn't be mined for the sake of mining it. It should be treated with respect, and there should be a way of giving back there. Does that make sense? I think that's really important, because then we're back to the transactional hierarchical power structure again. So we need to have conversations around that. if we open up our cultures and our hierarchies and our organizations, and we're not so afraid of moving outside those limited conversations, and you're like 155 people on your email thread, if we can move away from that, then we give each other an opportunity to grow. And then we have a conversation about something completely different, because really, in essence, we have to tell a new story now, because the old story is not working. And that new story has to be collaborative, and it cannot be hierarchical. We have to reset the power dynamic.
That's really interesting. We've got a question coming through about from a student, actually an ex-NUA MA student, hello Philip, which has, have you any reading recommendations, such as books on running creative businesses with this 21st century approach?
Do you know what? One of the things I read more often now, actually philosophy. Philosophy, you know, that is more important. Anything to do about taking time. If you like poetry, please take 15 minutes a day and read that. The other thing is Polly Higgins's book, which give me a second and I'll come up with the title. Polly Higgins, for anyone who does not know Polly Higgins, she unfortunately passed away last year. She is the earth lawyer, and she is the woman who came up with the notion of ecocide, that the earth has rights. And I think anyone who's creative or who's in business or who feels like they are stuck in a rigid, you know, organizational structure, industry structure, read Polly's book. It's absolutely phenomenal. So yes, about running a business in the 21st century, any type of business, I think Polly is inspirational there, because she very grounded in the law, very grounded in all of that, and then to take this creative conversation and her relationship with the earth, if you like, and nature, and then toss that out into something that was just so incredible. Yeah, Polly Higgins' book is amazing. I'll stick it up in the chat in a second.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd like to ask, you know, some of our business community about their ideas about what you're kind of thinking about these new approaches, because sometimes when you are in enterprise, and I know this myself from running one, you tend to be so busy doing your enterprise that you forget to think about the philosophy or your values of why you're doing it. And I think some of the ways with the internship program that's part of this Connecting Creative Capacity program is that new thinking will come through from a new generation into these organizations, and will actually help drive that thought leadership within these institutions. So particularly with that kind of like a new approach to a different hierarchy. So yeah, anything there would be interested. Dare to be Great, Polly Higgins is the book that's in the chat there.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Look, I've ran quite a few businesses myself now, so believe me, I understand exactly what it's like to, in the early days, make payroll and get my accounts done on time. So I get that. I think that the best businesses and the best leaders for me are those who are self-reflective. Because leadership and building a business, it always comes back to you. I mean, any of your own personal beliefs, sometimes beliefs that's not right or true about yourself, we all have them, they really come to the fore. And whether we like it or not, those types of things drive you, and then they drive the business. So all leadership comes back to the leader and their team. And there is something about being humble and being grounded and giving yourself a chance to say, okay, right, everybody's screaming at me today, but I'm taking 10 minutes because I need to reflect and think about this. And I suppose the founders and the businesses that I think do a really good job have benefited from that space, because it gives you access to something else. It gives you access to that quiet or peace that will help you take that jump or that leap, or take that inspiration, or go for a walk, because you're never going to get the answer to a problem while you're banging your head off your to-do list. That's never going to happen. Never does. In fact, you're just going to get more overwhelmed, and then you'll definitely want to shut off your computer. And I also think the biggest lesson for me in all of this is to build a community around you. Now, you might not have those people yet in your business, but you don't have to do all this thinking on your own, and you don't have to do all this type of heavy lifting on your own. And if you can build a community of people around you who understand what you're trying to do and really get what it's like to have 150 people on the payroll on a Tuesday, but you still want to create a business that affects change, you can do that. And that will make the biggest impact of all, because, you know, we all need support and help and peers and a community. And also those people will very nicely kick your ass if what you're saying is not what you're doing, and it's safe, and you're not having that conversation maybe in a place where it's not appropriate. And then build a community like that within your organization. So you've got two running together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if anybody's not, I can't see any more questions coming through, but I mean, that was really, really fascinating. And I think it's given us much food for thought about how we do run creative enterprises. And it's just great to get your kind of perspective from a different country, to think about all your expertise with innovation and tech, and to bring that into this session today was fantastic. I wanted to call on Will, if he is there, to just talk a little bit about our internship program while we've got a few minutes. Is that okay, Will?
Thank you. So I just wanted to talk very briefly about the internship program that sits alongside Connecting Creative Capability. The internship program is about placing creative graduates into all kinds of businesses to help them grow their creative, basically bring a new perspective, grow their creative resource, generally embrace creativity in a more human way. So the internships are exactly that, fully paid internships funded through a New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, which allow us to basically give you a 3-month intern for the cost of £1,500 to the business. The graduate themselves will be paid a full living wage whilst they're doing that, though. The funding makes up the difference, basically. It's a really, really positive program. We've been running in various forms for about 3 or 4 years now, and we usually get a fantastic selection of young people to go off and work in your businesses. If you are interested at all, I will post very shortly a link to a file, which I haven't uploaded to WeTransfer quite yet, because I was spending a little bit more time. That's all right. And on that file, you will find all of the details of the program, how we manage the employment, how we manage all of the intricacies. The short bit, though, that I need to tell you now, which is the what do you do if you're interested, is very straightforward. Contact me via the internships@nua.ac.uk email address. Again, you'll find all this information on the sheet. I'll be posting a link to it in just a moment. And ask for a job description template. All we need from you at this point is what you would like someone like this to do in your organization. We're looking to advertise the roles in January, and they'll be aiming for a September start. So we've still got a fair ways to go. There's no upfront cost. There's no commitment at all until you've found the right person for your organization. But yeah, that's where we are with the internships. So if you would like to know more about this, please use the email address that Jordan has very kindly posted into the chat, because he's a wonderful, wonderful, thoughtful person like that. An information sheet will be arriving in just a second, just as soon as I've uploaded it to WeTransfer. So do download that and have a read through. And yeah, if you have any questions, contact us via the email. Thank you. I think that's everything I need to say.
Thank you, Will. I mean, it really is a really good scheme to bring new thinking and new talent into your organizations. We're a little bit ahead of time, actually, but what I wanted to do now was have a comfort break. We can then probably start at 11:15. We have to keep to time because people are dropping in and out of these sessions. So we will have to start with Akin at 11:15. So you can go for a break now and probably kind of incubate and think about some of that really fascinating stuff that's come through. We've got some thanks in the chat there that it was very interesting, very insightful. So thank you very much, Mary. And also again, Mary, for stepping in and producing such a fascinating talk at such short notice. We really are grateful, and it was absolutely wonderful, and I think perfect for the community that we've got here today. So again, my thanks to you for that. So we'll take a short break. We'll be back in the room at 11:15 when we're going to be joined by BAFTA award-winning TV director and advertising executive Akin, who's going to talk to us about how we kind of need to adapt to survive in this new age. So I think that's something that we'll all find very fascinating as well. So we'll be back in the room at 11:15. So we'll see you all then. So thank you. So it's now 11:15. So in true media style, we'll continue back. So I wanted to welcome back all of you who are here this morning, and also any new guests who've just joined us for this particular session. We've just visited with Mary Carty from Ireland, who's a creative enterprise and technology expert. So from Ireland, we're now going to go to London. Later on in the afternoon, we'll be visiting Sweden and then back to Brighton. So the power of the internet and the science and the imagination that Mary was talking is really enabling us to cross-collaborate in ways that we would never have deemed possible, even just a few years ago. So I'm delighted now to introduce our second speaker, who's Akin Akinsiku, who is an NUA graduate, I believe, an alumni from some time ago. Akin is a BAFTA award-winning writer-director and works across creative advertising and TV. He's interested in narrative and branding, and they're basically a bit of a speciality, I believe. And Akin has also launched many award-winning channel rebrands for things like MTV, Nickelodeon, Nicktoons, Nick Jr., and the Walt Disney Channel. He's also co-created, director and writer on BAFTA nominated and broadcast award-winning preschool show in CBeebies called Apple Tree House. And although animation and design are his traditional background, he considers narrative and branding to be his speciality in a very broad sense. Narrative in the way we use stories to connect to our audience, and branding as it relates to the way we communicate our values to an audience. So Akin's going to be talking to us today about adapting and how we can adapt to survive. He'll talk about his media practice and the need for us to become multi-specialists, and he will explain what he means by that in the talk, and how that is needed in order for us to make work that is relevant and also work that is responsive to the society we live in. Akin will talk about his working methods, projects, and how he develops his global networks. So I'm delighted to introduce Akin if he's here, so we can spotlight Akin. Hi there. And
hi everyone, thanks for that introduction.
Yeah.
I kept looking behind me thinking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we've got a BAFTA winner, remember? So yeah.
So that's my imposter syndrome there. Like, whoa, oh, yeah, it's me. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so hi everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Yes, I am definitely a NOIR alumni graduate. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for inviting me over. So let me start off with my slide. Okay, so we're starting off with this lovely image, and many times that's the way I feel about myself, singing and dancing to earn a living. And many of you at different points in time will feel this way, but it's fine, it's okay. It's something you should get used to. Just a little quick warning. For me, this is kind of more of a conversation on, well, a conversation in terms of me talking, and then hopefully at the end there will be a little bit more sort of back and forth between myself and you guys. And it's based on my observation, my own personal experience, and my observations, and things that I've kind of noticed along the way. It's not a one size fits all, and even though I'm talking about sort of multi-specialist, it doesn't mean that that's the only path. There are different ways of doing things. And I think what's emerging in this new world order is a kind of more of a pluralistic way of looking at the world, and the way in which things kind of function, and the way we actually progress in our society. So just as a sort of, to touch base, The stuff I'm going to try and talk about, I've kind of worked into 3 different chapters. Okay, the first, I'll talk about who I am and what I do so you can see where I'm kind of coming from. Then I'll kind of try and break into the way I understand what a multi-specialist is and how that relates to me and the way I kind of work. And the third one, hopefully, just little tips as to how to become a multi-specialist within the context of surviving in our new world order as we have it. So, and also sometimes I will interchange terminology. Sometimes I'll use the word multi-specialist, sometimes I'll use the word generalist, and sometimes people use the word polymath. Sometimes people interchange the usage. Sometimes people think they're slightly different things, but for the sake of this conversation today, I'll basically swap between those 3 terms. So the first, who am I? So basically, my first experience in terms of kind of developing my ability as a creative person was at Noir. But prior to that time, I was in Nigeria and I studied in a place called Yaba College of Technology. And it's like a 2-year course where we did everything from sculpture, we did ceramics, we did textile design, we did graphic design, we did illustration, we did painting, we did everything. We worked with clay, we worked with metal, all kinds of stuff. And then when I returned to the UK, I went to Noor and I did one of, I don't know if that course still runs, where it's like the first year you study photography, illustration, graphic design, and animation, and then after then you kind of specialize. So it gave me a little taste of so many different things. And I think in some ways, my early years was kind of the beginning of that sort of multi-specialist sort of drug that was kind of injected into me. So when I graduated, I worked in a couple of places, tandem films where I did a bit of rotoscoping, and that drove me crazy because I was in a box. I was in a black box for 1 month, just kind of tracing out lines on animation. And then I ended up in Viacom working on MTV Europe. Again, in that department, I learned how to become a producer, a promo producer. And effectively what we did was we created branding and trailers for all the shows on MTV. And it was an amazing space because it was like getting paid to do stuff that was fun. We just literally did stuff that was fun, that just happened to kind of sell the channel or sell the values of MTV at that time, or sell particular shows. Again, in that particular department, I further gained the ability to kind of diversify exactly what I was doing. So on the one hand, I was able to kind of use a lot of my creative animation skills that I learned. But at the same time, I was learning more about live action stuff, like shooting stuff for people, using graphics, using motion graphics, and also organization skills, and kind of working within a team, working within a department. Because prior to that time, I hadn't actually started to work with large groups of people. And then from there, I moved on to Nickelodeon, where now I started working within the kids industry in terms of kids entertainment and kids content. Again, I was working in a department that was very fortunate. It was a very diverse team. Again, you had the chance to work on different types of things. So on the one day, I might be working on a piece of promotion for a particular show. The next day, I might be working on what we now call branded content. In those days, it didn't really have a name. And branded content were basically short films. They were usually about 2 to 3 minutes long. And they basically entertained the audience, but articulated the values of the brand. And it was a way of indirectly promoting your channel and your brand, but actually not, it was more like a sort of a subtle way of promoting the brand through entertaining, and sometimes also education. So, and then eventually I left. After about 10, 15 years at Nickelodeon, I became like an art director. Again, sidestepping from someone who actually created narrative to someone who's actually creating image. And then that led to, apologies, I had to put this in. My wife forced me to put it in, but it'll make sense further down the line. I won a few awards, and that kind of helped kind of propel me and push me forward in terms of my career. So I left Viacom with a nice golden handshake as things happen. And what I started to notice while I was in Viacom was the industry was changing. And when I started off at MTV, there was a lot of money in television. When I say a lot of money, a lot of money. And then slowly over the years, you had pretty much every year, 20% of your budget was cut for the department. So that meant a lot of people were, I mean, I'm surprised I survived 10, 15 years at Viacom, because every 2 years there was a purge. Every 2 years there was a purge. and there was more and more restraint in terms of what you were able to do as a creative. So we changed from a department that did a lot of really amazing creative work to a department that just sold shows. We just sold, the show would come from America and we just made trailers to just sell the shows. There's nothing about values. There's nothing about, there's very little about educational stuff. It was just, how do we sell the show? How do we sell the show? It was more about logos, how big the logos can be on screen, how big the tune-in times could be on screen. And there were two reasons why that was happening. Our main competitor was CBBC and the CBBS, and obviously they were public funded. So it meant as a channel, they didn't have any advertising, and parents usually preferred those channels because they saw them as kind of slightly more, more wholesome. The second thing was the internet. And this will come into play later on when I go into it a little bit more in detail. And year on year, we're seeing our audience viewing just literally plummeting, primarily because eyeballs are shifting from the terrestrial, not just terrestrial, but normal sort of conventional television to the internet. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall and decided, you know what I kind of need to do is to do a lot less promotions and try and sidestep into advertising, but also just creating content, because I kind of have this feeling that people will always need content regardless of, the population is expanding, people are going to need to watch stuff. What I didn't know was what the type of stuff that people were going to be watching. At that time, it wasn't very clear. So I left Viacom and I decided to go in different ways. One of them was creating Apple Tree House, which was my first tentative step into creating long form content for television. And that worked, but worked very, very well. Something else I also tried to do was to kind of sidestep into advertising and do slightly more grown up kind of material. And that was very difficult. In fact, all the different new avenues I tried to explore, it was quite hard to break into them because people kind of felt, well, you can only do kids TV. You can't do advertising because you're from broadcast. So I couldn't go on to advertising because I was from broadcast. I couldn't do grown-up television because I came from a kids TV kind of background. It's like, well, you can do kids, but you can't do grown-up. Anyway, so just kind of breaking it further down, some of the other stuff that I kind of do is I also do graphic novels on the side. One of the graphic novels I did probably like a good 10, 15 years ago is called Manga Bible. And that's been translated to about 8 or 10 languages. I can't remember. And I did another one called St. George, Blood and Martyrs. And then there's a couple I'm working on right now. So that's in terms of my interest. I'm just constantly firing in different places. Oh, I didn't mention the fashion brand I'm working on at the moment. I'm only joking. Okay, so these are the different clients I've kind of worked with over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. As you can see, the brands are kind of very diverse. On the one hand, I've got Deutsche Bank, that's kind of like a huge sort of like, global kind of banking kind of system. And then we've got BBC, you've got Disney, and then you've got Waitrose, lovely, beautiful Waitrose. And so my latest, this is what I pretty much do today, or a part of what I do today, is the Department of Image, which is my creative studio. And Department of Image is where we work on projects that tell different types of narratives. So it could be anything from branding, it could be documentaries, it could be animation, all kinds of different things that we kind of work and develop on and develop. And then we've got Group of Humans, which I can't say a lot about, but what I would say is it's kind of like having Suicide Squad. Sorry. I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's kind of like having Suicide Squad without the injection in the neck. But we're kind of basically, it's about industry experts kind of placed in different parts of the world. And depending on which project, teams are pulled together to kind of execute it. So we don't have a physical structure. We don't have a physical place. It's just heads all over the world who are really good at we're supposed to be good at what we're doing. And depending on the project that lands, we kind of divvy it up and we kind of get it done. And because of the internet, and especially because of COVID, it's kind of accelerated the way in which we work. Anyway, hopefully I have time to come back to that later on. Okay, so very quickly, and I'm very aware of time, I'm just going to play very quickly a little 2-minute edit of the stuff that I do, and then that kind of gives a basis to what I kind of build the rest of my talk on. So hopefully this plays. Yes, it's playing.
This looks yummy. Well, maybe Flo and Frank's rainbow cake is the gold we were looking for. Are you ready? Let's go.
Hey Leona, it's Steed. You might have seen my videos on YouTube.
How do you know my name?
Don't worry about that. I've got a little surprise set up for you. We're going to go on a little adventure. You up for it?
If I ruled the world. If I ruled the world,
Oh, mate, I would hate to rule the world. I'll delegate that role to someone else.
ooh, if I ruled the world.
Bring about real change? That's a pretty big question.
There's so many things I would change. I would do everything we're doing, but upside down, I'd change it all. I think it's actually our jobs to change the world.
So, truly, it's our job to change the world. So, who am I? First and foremost, I see myself as a storyteller, creative director, prompt producer, copywriter, writer, director, short form creator, long form creator, documentary, brand specialist, graphic designer, and illustrator. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, and probably that list might be expanding a little bit in the future. Okay, so multi-specialist. What's a multi-specialist? Now, a lot of people tend to think of it in this way, as sort of basic kind of breakdown. A specialist is someone who kind of focuses more on one particular thing. Actually, before I get into that, I was literally going to forget this. Can we actually run the poll? I'm just going to ask people very quickly to just, do a very quick poll to see where you feel you fit, whether you feel you fit as a specialist or as a sort of multi-specialist. So in general, specialists tend to be people who are known for doing one specific thing. So you might be like a bass guitarist, or you might be like a saxophonist, and that's what you do. It's a specialty. Your specialty tends to run very deep as opposed to wide. Whereas a multi-specialist is someone who kind of knows a little bit of everything. In the past, they used to be called like a jack of all trade, master of none. And so your knowledge is generally considered to be kind of surface level. Now, a lot of creative people, the theory is a lot of creative people tend to fall into the bracket of a multi-specialist. They have loads of different things that they're kind of interested in, and one thing might be the thing that they kind of focus on, and they become known for that one particular thing. Again, this is all kind of varying degrees. It doesn't work as an absolute. So not every single creative person is like that, but you do get some creative people who are specialists and they focus on one main thing, and then others are kind of like a little bit of different types of things. I kind of tend to fall more into the second group. So this is a quote from Heinlein, who's one of my favorite authors, and he alludes to a little bit into the whole multi-specialist thing. A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship. I don't know what con a ship means. Design a building, write a sonnet, balance account, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. Okay, obviously that's his point of view, but I thought that might be an interesting thing to share. And people think differently. That some people veer more towards specialist and feel that specialism is the way to go, and other people kind of think slightly different. Okay, so mommy, what's a specialist? Also known as generalist, multi-potentialist, or polymath? Answer probably you. And I think from the poll, most people here seem to be. So many creatives are multi-specialists. Maybe if you just don't know it, creatives are mostly divergent thinkers instead of convergent thinkers. Because of this, creative people tend to get bored of things easily. So ask yourself, are you a creative wired to only do one thing? The world thinks differently. The world loves a specialist. So what we do here is we blame the Industrial Revolution, because that kind of necessitated people to kind of focus on particular tasks and roles. And in some ways, at that point in time, the Industrial Revolution changed the world for good, because it accelerated human growth in a sense. Employers love this. And in my experience, particularly once leaving Nickelodeon, that was a constant obstacle I kept on coming across. People wanting to kind of put me in a box. You can't be a creative director and a director. You have to be one or the other. You can't be a writer and a director. You've got to be one or the other. But I had all these skills that I developed in a very unique environment. And I was quite keen on actually exploring all these different parts of my abilities, basically. And I do blame the Industrial Revolution. But I think things are kind of changing in a way, okay? Because why is there a need for multi-specialists? The internet, bloggers, social media, the twilight of linear TV, the rise of streaming platforms like Netflix, meant that the tide is turning in favor of creative multi-specialists. The same forward-marching technological innovations that necessitated specialism now allows generalist space to emerge from the dark. Now, with the internet, all you got to do is go on YouTube and you look at a lot of the people who are creating content. And usually you find a lot of those people actually multi-talented. They do quite a diverse range of things. And many of them actually have 2 or 3 channels where they tackle different things. And they're like the new frontiers. They're like the new entrepreneurs, the new creative sort of geniuses and people who are able to use the technology in a way in which previously, like 5-10 years ago, the stakeholders and the gatekeepers would never have allowed the kind of stuff that we see now on the internet. And I kind of realized this about 7-8 years ago, that certainly in the way in which content was evolving, the space that the gatekeepers had was diminishing by the day. So the question for me was, how do I kind of explore this, and how do I kind of use this to my advantage? So pros and cons. I was going to say pros and cons of specialism, multi-specialism, but we don't have time for the cons. We'll talk about just the pros, okay? One of the great things about actually developing different parts of your creative brain or creative nature is the ability to cross-pollinate. And one of the early things I found when I first started at MTV was a lot of people within the team came from, let's say, a graphic design background or live action background. I came from an animation background. So what I was able to do was learn from the graphic designers and the live action people. And I was able to pull my ability as an animator into the fold. And many other people didn't have that. So there's this whole thing about cross-pollinating ideas and concepts and ways of working. And it comes into fruition when you talk about idea synthesis. When you get a brief, you're able to think in so many different ways because you don't have one particular way of thinking. Adaptability, that's another one, a requirement for evolution and survival, especially in times of crisis. There's a channel I love called, it's called something Taitt, I can't remember the name right now. Basically what it does is it breaks down the evolution of every living organism on the planet and works out on a tier basis, the ones that are best built for survival. And generally, we understand this. It's not the strongest, the fastest, the biggest, the most ferocious. It's usually those who have the ability to adapt the most that tend to kind of win. Hence, why we humans are still here. So adaptability I think is an inherent skill in being a multi-specialist. Unique solution ideation, problem solving by cross-pollination, which I talked about earlier. And that's something that still pays dividends up till now. Particularly when I'm working with clients that are very corporate, when you're able to bring very left field ideas to the table. They may not buy those ideas, but the fact that you're coming with ideas that they hadn't seen before, to them, it's kind of like showing that actually you are a true creative in a sense. It just shows your ability to kind of maneuver and bring things that are left field that they might like, but they might not necessarily be bold enough to put out there into the world. Energy and zest, novelty and variety, key leadership quality. So the last 2 points, 6 and 7, are really important. Key leadership quality and the ability to empathize with other people. Because you're kind of used to very different ways of working and different ways of thinking and different disciplines in a sense. And even though the disciplines may still be within the same monolithical sort of discipline. So if you're a musician, you have different roles, you can play different instruments, you're still working within music. Because you're able to work across different areas, you have an insight that maybe someone who's more of a specialist doesn't necessarily have. And I think in terms of being a leader, when I say a leader, for example, you might be someone like a producer who maybe understands how to play a few instruments, has an overview that someone who's maybe a guitarist may not necessarily have. So there's that ability to kind of tap into other worldviews and other ways of seeing things and empathize with issues that other people might have and be able to kind of pull them together. And I think certainly from my experience, the best leaders I've had are those who've actually had a bit more of an insight that kind of crosses disciplines, as it were. So this is kind of a broad example of creative and also non-creative multi-specialist. Da Vinci, who's kind of like the grandfather of all multi-specialists. Robert Heinlein, who's like a writer I'm really into. Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Hildegard of Bingen, who is like, she was like an abbess and a writer and a poet and a composer, a botanist and a linguistic person, genius. Richard Feynman, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, there's a whole list of stuff. And apparently Nobel Prize winning scientists are about 25 times more likely to sing, dance, and act than the average scientist. I've got a guy there called KSI, who's number 10, and he's like, KSI is like anyone who's probably, let's say from 8 to 15 will probably know who KSI is. He's like a YouTube personality, and he does everything. He writes, he's got a YouTube channel, he's recently gone into boxing, and he does music, and everything he's done incredibly amazingly well. And he's just one of those people who on paper you would never have thought. He's basically like a class clown who basically took all the things he really, really enjoyed doing and just basically pushed it to the 100th degree, despite the fact that everyone told him he couldn't do them. So that's just a little running list of people from past, present, and future. So how to become a multi-specialist? So this list, back again, specialist and multi-specialist. What tends to happen is, again, like we did with the poll, certainly most of the guys here tend to be kind of veer more to the multi-specialist. What tends to happen, and which certainly happened with me, which is pretty much the same thing that happened to me, was you have all these different interests. You kind of pick one, and that one becomes what you focus a lot of your energy into in terms of developing yourself so that you become quite accomplished in that area. So for me, it was promo producing. I picked promo producing. All the other skill sets I had was still there, bubbling just beneath the surface. And once I was able to kind of achieve quite a lot with that, and proving myself within that role, and one of the things that kind of helps you prove your skill is doing stuff like winning awards and doing things that your peers and other people kind of recognize. And what that does is it kind of legitimizes you in a weird sort of way. You don't necessarily need it, but it does help. You know, it becomes like a shortcut, a shorthand. And people would say, oh yeah, this person's won this award, this person's that won that award. And in that legitimacy, what it does is it kind of gives you this halo effect. And that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. If you're proven to be good at one thing, then you must be good with other things. And that's kind of what I started to do. Was I took one thing that I was really, really good at doing, which was promos and branding, and using that as a sort of bargaining tool, in conversations with people, sold the other ideas and the other skill sets that I had. And because I'd already proven myself worthy in one area, people were a little bit more receptive to what I could offer in the other areas. And there's a bit of risk involvement on their part. So for example, with Apple Treehouse, I'd never done anything like that before. But what I had to do was actually build alliances with people who had done that, and then riding on their coattails, able to kind of basically achieve what I wanted to do. So that, using that as a system, it kind of pretty much worked for me in terms of selling the idea to the BBC for Apple Treehouse, moving more comfortably into advertising, moving more comfortably into branding that relates to kind of not just to kids, but to older people. And then it kind of spreads out, because once you start to achieve more than one thing, so once we did Apple Treehouse and that started winning awards also, then it meant other people were more receptive to what we had to sell. So the next thing we're doing now is animation series. Now people are listening, okay, they've done branding very well, they've done advertising fairly well, they've got a show and live action show on television, therefore they must be able to do animation. So that's the way in which I've kind of worked it, and so far that's kind of worked. Now, the reset of the post-COVID period, what happened to me was even before post-COVID, because of what happened with technology, I'd seen slowly the disintegration of stuff that relates to kind of conventional sort of like, linear television. So COVID, when it actually came in, didn't hit me as hard as a lot of other people, because I'd seen stuff happen and I'd lost loads of different clients at that point in time. And as always with these things, when there's a great reset, it kind of gives a little bit of a breathing space for people to kind of be able to reinvent themselves and kind of rethink stuff and find new solutions and new ways of doing things. So what I found what I've actually found out is, since COVID has happened, people have been a lot more receptive, even more than before, to new ways of doing things. People are actually looking for new ways of doing things because they've realized finally that the way in which we've been doing things for the last 50 years has kind of come to a halt. So I'm just going to go quickly to this little quote from Michael Espindola. Dominant culture in both industry and academia is that of narrow specialization. In this paper, we argue that in the context of COVID-19 crisis, where its wicked and transdisciplinary nature, the disciplinary approach of specialization is ill-suited to solve our increasingly complex problems, and that polymathic thinking can be a crucial asset in this regard. A lot of people are coming to that realization, certainly within the sphere of creating content for television. People are looking at new formats, the advent of Netflix, and the way in which they're actually structuring their programming and the types of material they're actually creating. Even when we look at things like diversity, it's shocking, because the world we're creating now is vastly different to the world that was there when I kind of came to television. The kinds of voices we're hearing now, I would never have heard 10 years ago. And I think that's a change for good. And I think COVID has even made that process accelerate. I'm having conversations with people pretty much every week that I wouldn't have had, let's say 2-3 years ago. And I think we owe that a lot, not just to COVID, but other conversations that have been happening around the issue of diversity, in just diversity in our society as a whole. The George Floyd thing actually accelerated a lot of things, certainly in terms of the whole Black Lives Matters thing. As a Black person living in the UK, I've found the last 2 years to be the most transformative, I would say, in the last 30 years of living in this country. Things that relate to the pollution, what we're doing to the environment, a lot of those things that we see as issues that relate to our values, our common values as human beings, have been pushed to the fore. And previously, the gatekeepers who've been quite focused on earning money, on making money and selling, also our politicians are now starting to listen to the voice of certainly the younger generation, because they're making demands that are very different. They're actually holding our leaders and the stakeholders to account. And now the stakeholders are realizing that in order for them to make the money, the almighty money, pound, dollars, whatever, moolah, for them to make that money, they have to make these changes. And they are listening and they're opening up to new ways of actually doing things. So this is, we're kind of living in sort of almost like times that are kind of biblical in their sort of in its scope, in a sense, with the plague and all the different things that are kind of happening as we speak. So certainly in the way in which we work, and the fact that I'm actually sat here in London and doing this presentation over Zoom certainly isn't something that would have happened maybe 5-6 years ago. And definitely the whole issue of working, certainly we're not going back to a 9-to-5 where everyone physically has to go into a building. We're opening up to very different and diverse ways of working. And hopefully, certainly for our emotional and mental sanity, it gives more diversity in the way in which we work, the way in which we relate to each other, the way in which we relate as a community of creatives and non-creatives, and the way in which we can influence the world as a whole. So moving on to the next one, the shape of things to come. These are all the different things I'm kind of working on. 2 years ago, I lost 3 very, very key clients because of all these changes that are kind of happening. And it's been a tough 2 years. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's been absolutely amazing. No, it's been a tough journey. And when kind of COVID kind of came in, you know, everyone kind of questioned what was kind of going on or what was happening. And I think creeping slowly out of it, I'm seeing the way in which people are thinking has changed a lot. And that's hopefully, touch wood, those changes will accelerate and we'll see a different world. Hopefully in the next few years, we'll see a slightly different world emerge from the ashes of the past. In terms of all the different things I do, one thing I haven't mentioned is I'm also a martial arts instructor and a meditation master. And then that's pretty much it. I won't say let's end, I would say let's start again. So that's pretty much it. I try to whiz past as quickly as possible because I'm looking at my clock and thinking, oh God, time is creeping. So please feel free to ask any questions. I haven't looked at the notes at the moment, but let me stop sharing there.
That was great, Akin. I actually think that you probably could have your own fashion line because your t-shirt complemented the color of your slides quite a lot. So in the post-COVID world, I would say, why not? Why not think about things like that? So yeah, we'll go a look. So let's have a look into the questions and see what we have. So yeah, we've got a question here from Sarah Steed, is how can specialists become polymaths? Because it sounds like that's something that we're going to have to try and do. And how do we reduce the risk of developing in this direction, given that our society still rewards the specialist in that industrial revolution model that you were talking about over the polymath?
I think it's diversity of thinking. When I say diversity of thinking, appreciating that different people bring different skill sets to the table. If we're all polymaths, it'll be a disaster, because if I'm hiring a DOP, for example, I'm doing a shoot, I want the best possible DOP who's got a very deep knowledge of it. That's what I need on board, as to whether he can do 10 different things, but his abilities as a DOP is kind of very shallow. For me, at that point in time of my need, that's not what I need. There are times when you will need someone who's a polymath. There's sometimes you will need someone who's a specialist. And it's more about that. And I think at the moment, we've kind of moved things the other way, where we're only looking at people who have a specialist skill. That's what, and a lot of people lie about it. They were like, oh, this is what I can do. But they've got 10 other things they're doing on the side that they're very good at. But they know as soon as they put that on the, bigger part, they know as soon as they put that on the table, the people hiring you get confused, and then they all of a sudden they view you differently. And that's one thing. It got to a point where on my website, I had to cut a lot of stuff out because people just got confused. So I was like, okay, this is what I do. I'm a director, and that's what I direct. And people look at it, oh yeah, that makes sense. But as soon as you start adding other stuff to it, then people get really, really confused. But what's happening now is people particularly when it comes to a higher level of creativity. So when you're thinking more about creativity and strategy, people are slightly more open to it. a lot more open to, because they think, okay, you've done X amount of different things, so you have different ways of looking at things. So you can't be blindsided because you don't know about the internet, or you don't know about TikTok, or you don't know about Instagram. You know, whereas before it was very much, you get one person who can do one job and that's what they can do. So certainly this is what I've found. Again, it's trying to move that dial a little bit more to the middle rather than to the extreme right or to the extreme left. And again, some people, there's some creatives I know who are amazing, but they're amazing at doing one thing. And that's what they enjoy doing. Again, for me as a person, it's not just, for me, the most important thing is enjoying what you're doing. And that's got to tick. That's got to be your sweet spot. You have to enjoy. My parents, I had long running battles with my parents because my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. They, you know, and the notion of becoming a creative was for them was like sacrilege, because they thought creatives, you just end up starving. And it's hard as a creative. They went too far for the truth. But for me, I put a premium on enjoying what I am doing as opposed to making loads of money. And my parents, as parents who want your children to do well, they want you to have a couple of houses, a couple of cars, you know, kind of stuff. They just thought, because as a kid, I was fairly decent with my academics. So they, in their eyes, they saw my future as doing something like studying something like law, which is kind of quite a cerebral type thing. And who knows, I might still go back into that. But for me, it was really important that I put a premium on doing something that I felt really passionate about. And I'm happy I'm doing that. And it allows me to do things and create stuff that I didn't see when I was a kid that I wished was out there. And now I can see my children's generation actually being able to experience things that weren't there when I was a kid. And for me, that's the greatest joy. It's like doing stuff that moves the world forward in a way you feel it should move.
Thank you. So, I mean, you can read through. Somebody's also wants to know if you're an Olympic marathon champion. That probably is not yet, but maybe next year.
Never. I'm not good at anything that has to do with long distance. No, my bones are too heavy. But I am doing a documentary about the reason why, and it's like fascinating subject matter, the reason why you don't get Black people in swimming, Black athletes in swimming, because Black athletes pretty much, you know, they kind of, you know, they appear in lots of different sports, but consistently with swimming, and they're actually very interesting, complex reasons why that's happening. And I'm doing a documentary on that at the moment. That's the first documentary I'm actually going into, long form documentary, but that's an interesting other conversation. But yeah, working across so many disciplines and areas, which of your skills or experiences has helped you the most? The one thing I would say, and I won't necessarily say it as it's a skill, I would say it's a mindset. The mindset is never say never. Is having a belief, and it's not. My wife sometimes she will say to me that, why is it that you just? What I tend to do is this: I will say things, so I would say things out in public, so it then forces me to actually do them. I kind of put myself in a corner. I'll say things, and then once I've said it, I know I can't backtrack. I know I have to kind of push myself and do it. And the more things you do that are sort of successful-ish, kind of helps, because I think a lot of times there's confidence. A lot of times, a lot of people get discouraged because they don't believe, they don't have that self-belief. We all kind of struggle with that imposter syndrome. We all do, but some people are able to kind of override that mechanism by just doing stuff. And that's what I tend to do. I would just, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to fail at this, I'm not going to do it. And what I just simply do is two things. Number one, I've got a team of people that I work with who are really good. And that team, when I say team of people, it's more like, it's not like a constant team. They're like different people that I kind of work with. And there is a whole networking thing, which I didn't really go into, I actually skipped over that. But that's kind of mega super important. Building network of people who kind of, they're not similar to you, but they're passionate in the same sort of way. And they're the kind of people that you can sort of call upon, and they will assist you, they will help you. Sometimes it's organizations that kind of help support. Mentoring is also really important. There's a couple of mentors that I have who are really, really good. And when you're really, really feeling shitty and you're like, oh, I can't do this, I failed at this, because there are times you will, you know, when we're doing Apple Tree House, there are days when I felt like I'd made the wrong choice. I'd done the wrong thing, because the same things you will cock up, basically. You will make mistakes, and some of those mistakes, but I've worked in environments where the people at the top make mistakes that cost millions, but no one knows about them because they're covered up. Whereas minions like myself, you make a mistake that costs maybe like 3 or 4 grand, you're having conversations in HR about how, oh yeah, we're looking at your progress and all that kind of stuff. But you know, and that's the way the world works. If you look at what's happened in politics in the last 10 years, you see that happening at the highest level. People who are in power, who are supposed to know better, make mistakes, and the consequences are huge, but they're covered up and they retain their jobs. So when we make little mistakes that are inconsequential, we think it's the end of the world. But people who have a certain degree of privilege, when I say privilege in the sense that they believe that they're there to run things, when they make mistakes, they just ignore it and then move forward. And then with time, people forget that. So I have that, because of my experience, I have that in the back of my head. And I know that I will make mistakes, because you will. There's no two ways about it. You will make mistakes. Even things that you're proficient at doing, you will make mistakes. But it's how you kind of overcome those mistakes and learn from them and push yourself forward. And I think having a support system around you, I've got a few mentors who are really, really good. I've got my family who are really, really good. My wife is just like, she's like an angel, you know, and those people kind of help steer you through periods that are really, really dark. And your creative partners also can help you kind of push through those periods. And then when you have the moments where you have success, enjoy. And that's, a lot of creative people don't do this. When you have success, enjoy them. Really, really enjoy those successes. Please do, because I went through a whole period where certain things will happen. I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll move on, or I'll move on. And then when the catastrophe happens, you kind of wallow in it. And it kind of needs to be the other way, you know. Enjoy your successes, and when you make mistakes, recognize them for what they are, because they will happen, and learn from it and then move forward. And that's actually something I learned from martial arts. Interesting, because one of the things about Shaolin martial arts is you learn that you will make mistakes. When you're training, especially when you're training for a fight with an opponent, you study what they're doing, and you study how to get around what they're doing. And a lot of the analysis works in 2 ways. You can do that studying beforehand by watching videos and working out a strategy. Some of it you have to do on the spot. You haven't got any response time. On the spot, you see them doing something, you make those calls. The beauty about that way of thinking is the understanding that when you lose because you haven't factored in certain things, which means moving forward, you kind of make compensation, you compensate for it. And I use that same kind of mindset for what I do every single day. Mm-hmm. So that's like an over explanation of.
Yeah, we've got another couple there that we haven't got to yet, but we are over time. So
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's no problem. It's interesting. I think what we'll do, we've got a question from Andrew and a question from Caroline. I think what we would do is maybe when we come back after the break, we can revisit those and kind of recap on the morning, because there's a lot of correlations to the first speaker there about joy in the work, and
absolutely.
And I think that's a fascinating thing to say. So everybody, we're going to break for lunch now. We will be you will be in a waiting room over lunchtime, so you don't need to stay in the chat, and we are going to readmit you for the afternoon sessions, where we have Mathieu Vrijman from Kultivator in Sweden, and Dumitriu, who's going to be talking about intelligent machinery and robotics. So a really fascinating afternoon. Akin, thanks. That was absolutely, again, I feel like we're having some great mentoring this morning from the speakers, and it's just really great to see you. We've got some great comments there about mindset being a skill. Really great to hear you talk. Thanks for this philosophy in action, really energizing. And I think that's what I was saying, like Mary was saying, like one of the things about business is, you have to read philosophy, and you're putting that philosophy in action. So it's absolutely, and obviously we didn't know that was going to happen, the synergy, because we didn't know Mary was coming till this morning. So everybody, we can break for lunch. We'll see you back for the afternoon session shortly. We're due back, if I get my time scale here, is we'll be back here at 1 o'clock for a recap where we can go through these questions. And then we'll start at 13:10 with Kultivator and Explorations of Now. And then Anna at 10 to 2. So everybody have a wonderful lunch break. Thanks for your time this morning, and we'll see you in the afternoon. So thanks, Akin, that was brilliant. Take care, everybody. We'll see you in the afternoon. Bye. Bye. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. How are you? I hope you've all had a good lunch. As I say, for those of you who are in Norfolk, it's very rainy. For anybody elsewhere, I hope you're having slightly better weather. Well, I think we had a fantastic morning this morning from the two speakers. So, you know, heartfelt thanks to them, and as it's come through in the comments. We're going to have a bit of a recap of the morning, but we do have a couple of questions to catch up on. One of which was, and I'll try and answer this from what I think Akin would have said, is, do you think that universities should be returning to a traditional liberal arts education programme for undergraduate degrees instead of focusing on specialisations? And should that be a priority from government? I mean, when you think about what Akin was saying, he did really have a very broad education at undergraduate level, both in Nigeria and here at Norwich University of the Arts. I think the course he was talking about as well before my time was visual studies, which took you on different journeys. And then, or should we specialise? Because when you get to a degree level, you do start to specialise. My thinking and thinking about it in context of the talk was there's probably space for both, because as Akin was saying, we do need specialists. And we also need people to be multidisciplinary. So I think about that, I think the idea about it being a mindset, I think there's probably space for both types of degree to help. I think for me, it would be good to have both, really, because then it helps people focus. You're right, I am going to be quite polymathic. I am going to have a broad overview, and that's more the way I think, or I do want to specialize in. So I think having, it's very, as we were talking in the first talk, there's not much space for that. So how we would kind of build that ecology is a different matter. So that's kind of my thinking on that one. I hope I've kind of answered it or done that one justice. The next question that we didn't get to was, do we think COVID has increased the opportunity to explore boundaries of computer-generated imagery to represent human experiences and emotions? I mean, looking at a lot of the animation work that Akin was doing, a lot of that was quite human picture, you know, it wasn't kind of computer generated as such. But there are, as we'll be finding out in the talk later on from Anna, the idea about like working with machinery, with artificial intelligence. I think there is quite a lot of space for looking at different types of computer generated imagery. It's used quite a lot in terms of autism training and neurodiversity to look at different ways of generating images of human experiences and emotions. So I think that would actually be a growing area. To recap on the morning, I think we've had I've written down some key words as I've been going, which are things like multi-specialism, youth, actually, and the ideas coming through from youth, idea synthesis, then through things like play. How can we kind of generate a philosophical approach to our enterprises? And how can we kind of build collaboration and community? So thinking about all of those things in context, we can kind of probably now start to look at our afternoon of speakers. I wanted to introduce Mathieu here from Kultivator. Kultivator are a collective, an arts, farming, social projects organisation that work at the juncture of all of those disciplines. They're also working on a collaborative partnership-based approach called Explorations of Now, which fits in with the United Nations global agendas on sustainability and also for the 2030 remit for climate change. it's a multidisciplinary project, which we'll hear all about in a moment, but it's funded by many different people, and it's also, so it's multi-funded as well as multi-operational, and it brings in cross-collaborative work across the arts, but within an agricultural arts remit. So really interesting work. So if I can call on Mathieu. Hey, Mathieu, are you there?
Wow, thank you. What nice to be here. Really exciting, this thing with Corona, that you can have lectures all the way around. So I will just close my doors because we kind of have a heat wave here of 30 degrees, which means that the farm behind me is very active to try to give animals water and so on. So, one second.
Nice to see the real world there.
Yes, we kind of have 30 degrees warmth. Yeah, so I'm so sorry that I couldn't listen so much to today's some program, because we were a bit running with animals and everything, but I jumped in because I had the wrong time. I thought it was my time when in the mail, so I was ready to speak an hour ago. So I heard a bit about multi-specialism and so on, which I think very interesting and very fitting with, I think, the subject. But yeah, so I will share my screen. I'm Mathieu Vrijman, and I'm one of the co-founders of Kultivator. And we exist of a lot more people, even more intelligent, so it would have been better if someone else would have been here, but my wife, for example, but I will try to do my best. So I will share my screen. And again, what was the time I have again? When should I?
We have about 35 minutes. It's okay to run over or a bit short, and then we'll ask some questions. So it's very flexible. It's a very informal, friendly conference. So work away whichever way suits you, I think.
Okay. Yeah, because I will run you through then a bit of Kultivator's work, which I will try to do short. It ended up now we are leading a course called Action for Sustainable Development. That is a year course for grown-ups. So to be honest, it's very difficult to talk about us shortly, but I will try. And then mostly I will talk about explorations, which is intensely fresh, because the end result will be shown in August now. So we are in full development. So I'm talking to you half in a garage, because I'm multitasking and building the signs and doing stuff while we're talking about it. So I will try to do my best, but let's see if this all works. Yeah, so like you see, Kultivator, we describe ourselves as an experimental corporation of organic farming and visual art practice, situated in the rural village Dierstad on the island Öland on the southeast coast of Sweden. By installing certain function in abandoned farm facilities near to the active agriculture community, Kultivator provide a meeting and working space that points out the parallels between provision production and art practice, between concrete and abstract processes for survival. Kultivator initiates and executes meetings between idealism and realism, hoping that fruitful cooperation should take form. So, to put it shortly, we put together in the beginning and in the base, it's farming and different businesses and art to see how we can work together. And also good to know by forehead that we see, for example, farmers are very near to cultural workers. They shape the landscape, our cultural landscape. They shape our water. And we think that art should play a role even in this shaping of landscapes and other things. And that is with businesses and companies the same, you know, and actually for all of us individuals. So in a way, if you ask me also about multi-specialism, we all need to become specialists in sustainable living if we can deal with the challenges ahead. So it's good to know that that is the mind we are working with a bit. Let's see. Oh, how does this? Okay, no. Yeah, and I think we got to know, Mary, you said you were at 2006, we were at the Lake District, which was an important step in our organization, actually, in the creative rural industry, or no, sorry, maybe I forgot the name exactly of the conference by literal Ian.
Yeah, it was about rural arts, wasn't it? And I always remember, and you did a presentation about this project, which we can see here. So yeah, that's where I met. It feels like it was only yesterday, but obviously it's a while ago now.
Yeah, but I showed, this is another version of it, but in that time when we began, you can say, and I will show you a little bit in slides more, but this is very much also how we work still today, is to work together, and that means even multi-species. So to work with the biosphere, to not maybe only eat the cow, even if we have a milk production ourselves and so on, but maybe eat with the cow and discuss with the cow and with the farmer how, and this kind of arrangements we have been working with a lot, but I have a bit difficulty. Oh, it's just clicking. Okay. So here you see our farm area in this island in the southeast of Öland. We moved from Amsterdam there because my wife's sister lived there. Actually, it was very practical. And then we started to invite people to come, and artists to work with us in this very rural place. And that led to a lot of projects. So in the last 16 years, I think we had about 130 residents, artists, researchers, farmers, organizers, activists. And we work also as a group of artists that exhibit and do actions other places, which I will show you. And this is just a reference to see, this is Van Gogh's painting. This is our farmers. So in the core, we are 2 farmers. On the left, you see Hendrik, who has mostly a milk farm. And on the right, it's Mia, who is more in permaculture and a lot of vegetable production. But now we are leading this course in which we are doing mostly forest gardening. So, but it's nice to see this reflection of once artists like Van Gogh went to the countryside, painted them, and showed to the city how it is. And now, of course, farming is not like this anymore. It's much more industrial and very much, but we also work a lot with this, showing how it is, even if it's sometimes a bit confrontation. But here you see some images of us working, and this is the 3 sisters in the core also. One is a farmer and the 2 others are artists. So we are very much multitasking. We exchange labor with each other. I will show you later. This is me very young. And then for a Dutch person, you can't build in Holland. So to go with a chainsaw and put a place for a window, this freedom feeling of the countryside it was enormous and is still a beautiful freedom we have, of course. And this is me a bit waking up for, oh yeah, food comes from something. And that is an important issue also within the way we work, is to start to reconnect urban and rural, the rural which produces everything for the urban, but that is not joining in the discussions about sustainability or everything else. So this simple picture is anyway still very necessary. I will just show you a very short selection. Through all the projects we've done, I will just show you a very little selection that shows you how we work. This is then also very much in the beginning. We made here you see that we copied the exact surrounding of a gallery in Malmö, the 2nd biggest city of where we invited people for dinner. So we said they can design the dinner. What do you want to eat and where do you want to plant it? So I would like to eat salad, and then you plant it there. And this is in the city then. So to make that connection for people, and then we start to work it, and we invited them, and then all the people joining and at the gallery, they get updates. How is it going with your dinner? So I have a little film here, which I hope is not too loud. Or there's no sound.
What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law.
You see why we chose Prodigy and the total respect for the law is because the European laws were not allowed anymore for also small producers to keep the seeds. You have to have seeds. You have to all the time buy new seeds. So there we want to combine a bit of activism anyway, also in art. And this I show also with the explorations of now is because we want to try to combine and more use art as a tool to do these actions we need to do for the challenges we have ahead, and for that more beautiful world that we very much need. But I will hop through this, but you get this connection. You start to understand food comes from something, where it's somewhere made. You are invited for dinner there. So then in the end, the people from Malmö came, and a lot, if you ask the farmers here, what is the use of our working together? One of them is that they meet people. So they can share their wisdoms and everything, you know, which they have. So in that simple input, there is already something, you know, and like we have done, like this gathering is then we have 17 artists coming from all over the world. It's from Namibia, Norway, Colombia, and they make projects. And because in the beginning, definitely we didn't have any economy, we work by exchanging labor. So these artists that you see here are also fencing, or they also need to help to get the cows when they escaped. So then we can make it happen. And then a lot of conversation starts to happen, which in itself is very, very valuable. And this is this kind of meeting places in this little stable that the farmer said, oh, I made that hole in the back by driving the tractor through it when it was snowy and ice. And now I see people from all over the world dancing. You know, so it's important. And also for those people, because the big city, we noticed a lot also that the rural has much more in common than, I mean, all the cities are kind of alike, you know, nowadays. They have the same kind of shops and so on. But if we have refugees coming here from Syria or from Tanzania, they also milk. They also know how. The countryside is very global, actually. And for people, much easier to have conversations and have, which in the cities they fail. Okay, I go through this, but then we get asked to also show ourselves in the city, which is much more difficult because, of course, we can combine farm and art in the countryside. But in the city, it was more difficult, but it's a very beautiful art space, W139 there. And we asked farmers to come with all the machinery necessary to produce hay bale. And we didn't ask permission, but the boss was with this. And then we rolled this into the gallery space, and to start to get the rule into the city, kind of aggressive, but necessary. An example of this was that the police stopped us and asked if that was marijuana. And to be honest, like to roll a whole ball, even Amsterdam is a bit free, but this is not, but you can see that they have no connection with their production of food and everything. This is, I will go through it a bit quicker. It's a rapeseed oil press that we made to show also the creativities of farmers, because especially small scale farmers, in my eyes, it's amazing how they fix stuff, do with very little amounts. They are very creative. So we said to one farmer, you get this amount, make a rapeseed oil press like we have on our farm. And then he made it, and we sold it as, we gave it away as both food or a Molotov cocktail, but mere joking, because you can put it in your car. So this is a lot taking up the also sustainable questions about how we should think about biofuel. And on the background, you see a corporation within Colombian group. And yeah, we work a lot to also use, like I said, art to take up questions. Yeah. This, I hope this works. This is another example. Then they asked us, how can the inner city of Stockholm become more sustainable? Can we do a conference on that? And we wanted, sustainable is one thing, but actually we want also more than that. We want like beautiful and fun. And so and that place in the inner city is so snobbish. So we said, we want chickens and so on. So we gave them a little animation to show, okay, this is, we want to go beyond sustainable. And yeah, and this is taking a bit up this this question of also not only, oh, how can we help the rural, but actually the urban needs help of the rural to become more cozy and more nice. So we arrange seminars to talk about this and how also to reintroduce animals into cities and for integration and everything. Yeah, it's a long question. I have to get my watch, but yeah, other forums to use it is to raise other questions. So we work with art and agriculture, but then we also got the question to fuse integration and how is that working? And I think England has the same problem, but it's difficult to get immigrants to go to the countryside because they have this association with the countryside of hell, like in some of the countries. So they asked us to, can we promote this activity, because they are often very knowledgeable. And then because of saying we don't do it as a municipality project or other, it's art. So we have no boundaries. And then a lot of people started to join because we don't demand anything of you, like no papers, illegal, legal, doesn't matter. We just want you to use the land productively. And that is an interesting question, which we think is very important. Like when is the land used productive? And then we got a lot of people and they wrote themselves up for land use and doing a lot of different, this is also how to arrange stuff. And that is a bit like now also with explorations of now, which I will come through, is important is also how do you design it? And they asked us, actually from Littoral in the Lake District, they asked us to make a conference for art and agriculture and all these movements that are going on, working with sustainability, rural, urban questions. But then we said conference is boring, we make a wedding between art and agriculture. And we changed an art museum to an office where we start to research if they get married, who are the family, what is the family tree. A lot of international curators were part of this and coming. I'm so bad at names from Ireland here, beautiful. But that is to use art and also have this concept of how to do something that is normal like a conference, but if you change it and use art as a room and making spaces, I think is very important what artists can do. But I'm going through this, sorry, it's really interesting, blah, blah, blah. Getting through to the wedding, and then here we're from a lot of people from international movement. Fernando Garcia Dori and the Drysdale Arts were here, and the wedding was also meant to make some vows, some promises. How do we live together? What is our relationship going to be? And these are we came up with a manifest that we tested both in the city and in the rural, where people can press dislike and like with questions to say, how do we go in relationship with each other? Because we think, and that is referring to that specialism, that we need to go and fuse much more different fields. With our challenges ahead, we need much more creativity to deal with it. This is also short, it's a long project, Grandmothers University, where we have, with the challenges ahead, we came to the conclusion that new technology is very nice, but the old people that still lived there before consumerism really kicked in, they are dying. So we are panically interviewing people, and this is in Colorado, about to give which knowledge they think we need for the next challenges and give it to us. So we make signs, and this is our farm. There we made a more base. It's an earth cellar, working with farmers, like you see everybody working, and school students, to make a physical university for grandmothers and fathers, or like old knowledge. Okay. I'm admitting somebody in the room now. I got this question because I'm the host, maybe. Leading to this is right in front, but behind me here. But I need to go a bit quicker. And this, I hope the sound I can take kind of off.
Imorgon på Moderna Museet i Stockholm.
You hear my voice better than that video? Okay.
som tack för maten.
This is anyway a little one that also needs, it's good to show, I think, because we were asked at the Modern Museum of Stockholm, like the big museum, the Contemporary Art Museum, to deliver ingredients for the dinner of the creative time, which they organized then, which is a huge event for cultural leaders or directors and bosses of museums and everything. And then we said, okay, we can give you that food, the ingredients from our farm, but then we built an alternative toilet. And we want them to use that instead, to lift the question of energy usage, because a lot of energy went into that food. Their shit can actually become energy if we get a bit less scared of toilets, which I think we should. And then, yeah, so we placed in the Modern Museum, in their toilet, our own, took it home and turned that into compost, which mostly was in the beginning for sunflowers to make it a bit arty, like. But it's a good example of how we work that too. It's art, it's fun, it's a bit weirdy, but also serious. It is a question about energy and how we have to have that relationship, a better understanding.
We have a little return ticket.
Okay. This I will actually just jump through then, but we are now, and also with Explorations of Now, and this is a cooperation that is going on. This is Carty from Oregon. That is a project where we want to lift the question, how can you have the biosphere as a serious partner in projects? So like the horse, for example, and this is a work where we take bacteria examples of our tongues, also of the horses, and they are together on a Petri skull. And by this, there is a conversation going on with our own bacteria, which is good to understand that we ourselves exist of mostly organisms. We are very little ourselves. We are mostly working together with micro, and to put them together. And just to finish about cultivators, that we are more and more working also now with public assignments to make activism more lasting, because this shows and stuff and happenings are short. So this is it. We made a stream that flows out of a museum, which takes the day water of the museum, and by streaming it, it cleans it one more time. So helping, using art to do sustainable action, because we are more free. And also installing, a drinking fountain. I don't know why this is happening. It's a drinking fountain to also take that issue, take away the water bottles and start to socialize water again. But now, Explorations of Now. So this is very fresh. And this is then, it happened because they asked us to come to Kultivator, which is a very known international dance group, one of the most known in Sweden. And they asked, surprisingly enough, me to come and give a lecture about how can they become more sustainable. And they are flying all over the world, so they're pretty much fucked. They're screwed, I mean, sorry. But but the question was very interesting, and they wanted anyway to make a festival to show the importance, and they are willing to change the whole the way the dance company works to become more sustainable. And can we do a festival? And this then we, because it, and then the interesting question came up, because this is a very free dance art group, very expressive, but they also acknowledge science. And you know, here in Sweden at least, it's very sensitive, the question that art should be free, should have no connection. But we are admitting we want to help out, to acknowledge the science that says that we need to transition immediately if we can deal with this climate change of biodiversity loss and so on. And this is very, we found very challenging, special to say two very free art groups, also like us and the Institute for Future Studies, which is it's an institute in Sweden, consists of about 75 scientists, shortly said that they lobby that science should think in several generations. So they think we should have always the future generations in our mind when we, and we agreed a lot with them, and what said, okay, let's join our hands, which is very scary to have science and art join, and see what we can come up with. And we call it explorations of now because we also didn't want to say what we're going to do. We want to do 3 workshops, which we did. Each organizes them, the visual arts, the dance, and the science. And in our case, we said we always have to have the biosphere with us, even if it's a bit weird. And because of Corona, of course, you had this, now Corona came, so we had everything online. But then we had one assistant, Phil, taking the horse to be always with us. And it sounds silly, but true, believe me, if you have a horse looking at you, even in a Zoom, you have more difficult bullshit because it's a bit scary, you know? And it gives a huge value to, even if it sounds very strange. But, and I will show you just a little short trailer. It's, I think, 1 minute of the workshop. We had in autumn, we had a little break of Corona, so we managed to get dancers and scientists and everybody to us. And this led to this workshop, which very much is the mini version of what is actually going to happen in August, which is times 100, what you see here, but it gives a good taste of what happened. And you will see dancers and biologists and
here on the telephone, cause we've no idea when we're coming home. Any place we wander to, any season we go through, I'll be fine as long as I'm with you. Heaven knows, running around the world with you. When you smile, I smile too. How I ever made it without you, heaven knows.
This one is also continuing, which is it's from Carty. It's quite difficult to explain, but you take microbes and you use it as a map to go around in nature, and it's all about getting lost. And in this project, I think that is very fitting and also very good. In the beginning, I was a bit skeptic, but we are all lost a bit in how to do this new world. And maybe we also need to look at everything with new eyes. So one of the projects is, this one is, for example, about is how do you go around in nature and get lost? Like, and the value of getting lost is very interesting, I think. And also when we scientists and artists meet, both of us feel a bit lost sometimes, you know, like, and this is good. There comes new thoughts of this. Yeah, and like I said, all these things, like these mobiles you see now, they are now 25 meters long and enormous. What will happen in August is a very big, but a bit the same. What you will see is a lot of people daring to try to work together with nature, daring to talk about how do we change without maybe knowing all the answers. But I think we need to already take small steps. And we can also see that this is working. So it is really, and in that question, I also very much believe in that. I work a lot also, like I said, in education with sustainability, that the one way to go forward, which is now growing, is, I think, romanticism, to go back to this. And I think we are at that time. People start to talk a lot about nature, mysticism, in a way, and this is good, I think. So yeah, here you see it is the area where now in August, it's where it will happen. It's a nature reservoir. Because of Corona, we changed everything. So we have 5 different festivals, but in the end, we made now a project which is outdoor and using an app so that the telephone can guide you through all enormous amounts of projects. It's about 20 projects happening, performances, and we made it now so that it could happen that we can completely make it solitude and have the distance because of Corona, and still you can experience live performances, even if now we are opening up a bit in Sweden. And here the wetland is a very important place where we will talk, and also one of the more better art pieces I think we will do is rearrange that we will have a lot of rocks, and then we will, together with dancers and scientists, fill a ditch, which is like the big problem here and everywhere, I think, is the ditching of the farmers to make the water. So we make it fill up and make this kind of landscape, the wetland, which is one of the most sustainable systems that exist. And here all the talks and seminars will be where also the scientists, when they are talking, will help by making bed houses and stuff. So it's very much practical and other cooperating. But like I said, I'm in the middle of half panic with this 20 works. And we are on top of the nature that you will see there. We work very much with biologists. So you will get a feeling where you walk and you go from one who is maybe a performance in a tree, and then you will get information about the biology, like about the trees or the moss that lives there. And then again, you see an art piece. And we want to layer those two together all the time. Because it makes you look different at nature and different at art as well, and different at science. And there in practicality, I think we all need to think about these kind of things. And here I am very happy with our solutions for all the signage that we will have, a lot of signs. They are made from old oak, burned, because that nature reservoir has taken away all the old oak. And we want to increase the biodiversity by doing this festival. So how can you not only be sustainable, but how can you actually be more than that? How can you be a contributor for a place? And this is fully possible if we start to think a bit innovative in my eyes. And that is framed in what is my main sentence for this event is walk in art with nature. So not in, but together. Yeah, wow, sorry. Hope I didn't overkill you with
No, that was... I'm just actually amazed that you did get the timings right. I know that we did race through it. And the work, I'm looking at the importance of your work in terms of how we discuss things, both in enterprise and farming. And we've got a very polarized world as well, where we have very binary ways of looking, like man or woman, or rich or poor, old or young, Brexit or anti-Brexit, and people aren't talking together. So I think like the idea of the dialogue is fascinating to me too. And the thing about the toilets is actually, it sounds unusual, but there's an awful, the public toilet is dying out, and increasingly our public spaces have become more privatized, and there aren't really, you have to now, if you want to go to the toilet in town, you have to go into a shop rather than it being a public space. So there's, you know, there could be sort of like community generators of energy if we went back to public toilets. Another thing I was taken on was the Grands University. I thought that knowledge exchange would be interesting. And then the idea of farmers. Yeah, if anyone's lived in rural spaces, and you can't just go to the shop and get something, you have to make something from what's around. So I really like that idea about the farming, bringing together, making things to make things work. And it reminded me actually of NASA, the science, the astronauts, the space thing, where when you go off on a spaceship, you can only use what you've taken with you, which is they call in situ resource utilization. So it almost fitted with that space program thing that we were looking at. We've got a lot of comments coming through, so thanks and hello. We've got that document for you, Beatrice, now as well, so we can send that to you. Nice cow picture. Somebody who worked for an arts manager for Essex, worked with Writtle Agricultural College on an artist exchange program with France. French artists worked with the agricultural students and staff, created installations. The most successful was probably based at the large glass greenhouses, which involved around 100 people and was celebrated with a public performance. So this idea of agriculture and art is really kind of something that's struck a chord. And the Agricultural College were great, and they collaborated on other projects over many years. Other ones, it looks like a really lovely liberal place to live. And so it's kind of like thinking about the idea of exploration and freedom. I think the idea, you know, we do think of culture, we do have different legislations and different jurisdictions, and how we perceive art and enterprise is different. Somebody's written, hey, I'm fascinated by this. I lived in, is it Skåne? S-K-A-N-E?
It's the south of Sweden.
Yeah. And now in rural Norfolk. And to be honest, I didn't see much engagement with environmental preservation in either place. And the question is, how did you start to work with farmers? Do you think it's easier being in Åland than in a bigger place? They have a small permaculture place, but never saw art being part of it. And so how did you begin that conversation?
To be honest, very easy, is because my wife, who is an artist, sister is a farmer and married with the farmer in those days. Everything got divorced here after a while, but so that is very much family based, which is that was very helpful, of course. And otherwise, I think for that, I think it's quite easy. We do also courses for art groups that say that they want to go to the rural and want to work there, but they're always whining that nobody looks at their art, you know. But then we asked, did you ever look at the farmer's place? You know, did you ever ask him to help him out first, or her, I mean? And so we always suggest that, like, first we help out, and then they will come to your exhibition or something. Yeah, so that is, I think, the step that artists often forget. They think everybody should be interested in their thing. A bit narcissistic.
Yeah. It's odd in a way, because artists tend to say about, or they'll talk about my work, whereas a farmer won't talk about the farm or the landscape they've created as their work. It's kind of more of a partnership with the land. So that's a really interesting point there, actually. So, and family connections are obviously key. Somebody's put in a final comment here, is one thing I've learned is that our neighbouring farmers always used to leave us freshly grown produce as a gift, which was really lovely. So I suppose there's the different gift there. And for enterprise, I was also, as a person who does do horse riding, I was reading a book by someone called Mark Rashid, who talks about the art of passive leadership. And it's actually a book about natural horsemanship and how you can, how you help and encourage the horse rather than try and dominate it, because you won't win because the horse is so big. And I was interested about, you know, the horse nose thing. You can pick up on subtle cues on what's needed and what your weaknesses are. It can spot them. So this book by Mark Rashid, I actually read it as a manager, really. I found it a very useful management book. And it's saying, you know, the bossy horse that shouts at all the other horses in the field, nobody wants to go near, but they want to go to the one that's kind of quiet and calm. And I found that a very fascinating thing. So I think in terms of enterprise, whether it's agriculture, art, culture, even, you know, some of the social side of things you brought in there, I thought that was really useful. I
really recommend, if you have a difficult group to talk to each other, put in a very strange element, like a horse. Like I said, we worked a lot with refugees, and racism was always the question, even within the groups, like of pro-Assad, not, and it was so tricky. But then we went to a horse, and suddenly you are two organisms, the human and the horse, and you, in one bam, you are like together. So it is really a good tips. Like, find some horse, and in the next one have them with you, because it does help.
Yeah.
Strangely enough.
I think we'll have to look at that. I think it's right, you know, bringing in that element, which then makes you look at your common humanity and what kind of brings together. So that's fascinating. Anyway, Mathieu, I'll let you go on, because I know it's very busy. You can go and get a nice cold drink of water from the fountains that you made. Enjoy the rest of the day. So it's hey do from all of us here in Norfolk.
Oh, wow, it's been an honor. Thank you for
having me. See you again soon, hopefully. Yeah.
Yes, bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. So fascinating talk there about agriculture and arts. The next talk is actually something very different, because we've got in Anna Dumitriu, who is an artist. She's an award-winning artist, actually, who works in the fields of both science, bacteriology, sculpture, installation, bioarts in general, and digital media. And Anna usually explores our relationship to things like infectious diseases, synthetic biology, artificial intelligence. And so we thought this would be a really interesting opportunity for us to hear Anna, who's a fantastic speaker, to talk about her project, Intelligent Machinery. She'll be taking us on a journey through her own artworks with robotics, the partnerships and, you know, that she had, and collaborations that had to be developed as part of that. And I think we'll leave it over to you. I think that might be better, Anna, for you, because you'll say it much better than I can. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Can you see me and hear me? I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Right, so yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just going to put that up the top there. And I wanted to talk to you today about my work with robotics and artificial intelligence, because although you know, it was sort of highlighted that I work across all these different areas. In fact, I've got a slide here that indicates some of these different areas that I work in. So these are some of my current roles, pretty much, apart from I've highlighted the EU Starts Artist in Residence with Schindler there, which was completed sort of halfway through 2020, although we still want to go back and do more and things because of the pandemic kind of preventing all that. So I've got all these different kind of relationships, but I have actually, I mean, people think of me as my work with microbiology and biotechnology, but I have quite an extensive background in working with robotics as well. In fact, my earliest residency was with the Centre for Computational Neuroscience and Robotics, my earliest long-term residency at the University of Sussex, which is one of the largest artificial life research groups in the world, or it was at the time. And I'm currently a visiting research fellow at the University of Hertfordshire in computer science. So going back to those days, I was very interested in I think like the writings of Alan Turing I mentioned, because the title of this talk alludes to that. He talks about the idea of intelligent machinery in his papers. And I was very interested in things like the philosophy of AI and philosophy of science and things, and what does it feel like to be a robot? So here's me using some very kind of old-fashioned now looking body sensing, motion tracking software, and recording my EEG at the same time. And I use this to inform a performance that I did back in about 2010 in collaboration with Inman Harvey at the University of Sussex, and it was performed at Lighthouse Gallery in Brighton, and it was called the Emergence of Consciousness, and it was about the idea that consciousness is an emergent property that that is caused by the fact that we have access to lots of sensory input and we have lots of interconnections in our brain. But there's this theory of the embodied mind and notions of sort of autopoiesis laid down by Francisco Varela, and in his book The Embodied Mind with Thompson and Roche, where he talks about, he makes a lot of links to things like Buddhist meditation. He was actually the scientific advisor to the Dalai Lama. So it's actually quite strange that he's so influential in computer science, because you tend to think of that as quite sort of dry and scientific and very code focused, but actually it gets into this very spiritual side. And in that paper, well, in that book, Varela talks about the idea that a robot having this sort of single sensory input, maybe like distance to the wall or something like that, is kind of acting mindfully, in the same way that a Buddhist monk sweeping the floor but only focused on the sweeping might be acting mindfully. There are other papers as well, which are really key papers in kind of this field, such as there's works by Daniel Dennett talking about the idea that consciousness might be a myth. And also Thomas Nagel's famous paper, what is it like to be a bat, really informed me in this work, because he says that we can't possibly know what it's like to be a bat because we don't have sonar. In fact, some of my colleagues at Sussex University at that time kind of tried to address that and actually built an additional sonar sense that you could carry around with you, which they called the inactive torch. And so I built my own robot. This is the robot, which was nicknamed Mary after Jackson's knowledge argument, which is another sort of philosophy of cognitive science type paper. The paper is actually called Epiphenomenal Qualia. I won't go into the details of that because it's a bit out of scope of this, but what this robot had a genetic algorithm evolved control system, which was designed to find the center of a room. And it did this in a way that, and I like to quote Ghostbusters here and say, no human would ever do it like that. So what it would do would be to fire off its sonar against all the points of the walls around and then spiral in on the center. And there's me removing all my sensory input. This is Robert Mason here as my young assistant here. He now runs the Virtual Futures podcast and things like that. But I think he was 19 when we did this, and he had to kind of, so I had earplugs in. I used bondage tape to wrap the earplugs to blank out my eyes and to wrap my arms around my body, and I was given a cane which would replace the sonar, and all my skin was covered with lidocaine. So I had very little sensory input, and it was a promenade performance where I basically lunge around the room with this cane, and Luke's job was to make sure I didn't actually kill any of the audience or step on the robot because it was quite expensive and took me a long time to build. So there's me kind of trying to find the center of the room, and I'm having to do it in a kind of human way. But I don't know where I am really, and I don't know. So the moment I reach what I think is the center of the room, I drop the cane, and then I'm kind of revealed back in the world. And the point is, I had no recollection. There were like 60 people around me at the time. The whole time I was actually totally focused on the point, you know, like my goal of finding the center of the room. I had no idea that this was a performance because of this reduction in sensory input. So the artwork was basically about communicating what is it like to be a robot. I mean, I had an argument with a computer scientist recently about this, and saying you're assuming a robot can feel, and robots have emotion to say what is it like to be one. I was like, well, you've got to define feeling, because surely that's a sensory input and things. So we had a big argument about that. But this is sort of an early work in this, where I was trying to explore what these kind of things mean. Then I ended up moving to the University of Hertfordshire. I went to give a talk there because I was the co-chair of the Alan Turing 2012 centenary. So it was 100 years since his birth. And I mean, he's quite famous now, but you have to think back in 2012, most people didn't know who he was. And so we did, as part of this Turing centenary campaign, which crossed art and lots of science stuff, and the chair of that was, you know, in collaboration with movie producers and all sorts of things. Now hopefully people have heard of Alan Turing and know what he did, which was designing the first digital multi-purpose computer. So sort of laying out the notion of the algorithm, so that a computer could run, rather than just running one task that it was fixed to do, could run multiple tasks. So I went there and gave a talk about my previous work to that, and my other work with robotics. And I ended up being invited to be a research fellow there. They said, yeah, Sussex is interesting, but you know, they work a lot with the bottom-up robotics. We've got humanoid robotics. We've got a robot house. You know, maybe you could live there for a bit or something. So I ended up, so they've got basically in a suburban estate somewhere near the University of Hertfordshire in Hatfield, they have a secret robot house that's populated with robots. Now, when these robots first moved in, you have to imagine the neighbours weren't very pleased. They were like, oh, what's it going to be like? We've got, you know, so it's interesting. So the neighbours weren't pleased that they're going to have all these robots. And they think we're going to have researchers turning up day or night. It's going to be really odd. But now they've sort of, you know, got used to it, and they're sometimes invited in for tea with the robots. And I was invited with my partner Alex May to go and live there, and we lived there for 2 weeks in the robot house, which is a smart home. And so it knows what you're doing. Like, you can't leave the Lucy up, because it will send an alert. It knows, and it can infer things. So the house can infer your behavior. So if you've like opened a cupboard door, switched on the kettle, sat on the sofa, turned on the TV, the house knows that you've taken a cup out of the cupboard, made yourself a cup of tea, and are now sitting watching television. It will infer that from the sensors. And every morning, about 8 o'clock, about 10 PhD students would turn up to turn everything on and get things working, because certain things had to be turned off overnight as well. Some were still working. This one that you can see in the front there, this is called CareRobot, and it's kind of like a robot butler, which is really intriguing, but it's for health and safety reasons. They're only allowed to operate it. I couldn't operate it. I couldn't have it on whilst it was only me with it, because it has this strong robot arm and it can literally slice through you if you don't know it's coming. So it's interesting that these care robots are actually considered so dangerous, and it actually takes a lot of researchers to kind of get this stuff working. We did a performance we did an opening for the sort of at the end of our residency in the robot house, and we had different like interventions in different rooms and things like this. And I did a performance where I choreographed from the smart home, from all the different cupboard doors and things and stuff, because you can actually kind of choreograph something from that, that I would have an argument with the CareRobot. And this is back in about 2012, 2013 or something like that. So so sort of in the earlier stages of social media and our relationships with social media. And so the CareRobot suddenly started accusing me of having drunk too much at the private view. So we were having, you know, glass of wine and stuff, and so it starts telling me off. And this is all triggered by different drawers and things. And in the end, the robot, I start arguing back with it and things like that. People are quite shocked. They really didn't know what was happening. I love that with kind of performance art, when it's kind of an intervention and people aren't expecting it. And in the end, the robot threatened to out me to my friends and family on Facebook, was the result of that. So it's kind of playing with these ideas about what the future will be like. Going through some other ones. This is our robot Harry, made with Alex May, humanoid art research robot 1. And one of the things this robot does is it exhibits boredom. So it kind of stands there and scans the room and looks around the room. And if it sees you moving around, it will fixate on you. And hopefully at that point, you'll decide to come up and see it and walk up to it. And at that point, if you just stand there and look at it, like people do, and they're like, what does it do now? It will lose interest in you. You have to move, you have to entertain it. And it's kind of playing with this idea of like, who you know, the word robot is a Czech word that means worker, forced labor, or slave. And but who's the worker in this relationship, or in our relationship with technology? Because a lot of the time we're providing the data that is being used by companies for profit to understand us better, to advertise to us, and all sorts of things. So we kind of put people in that position. And if you wanted to keep the attention of the robot, then and have it speak to you or something like that. And it used to say things like, I love you, and I like your hair, or something like that. And lots of strange, you know, just things to draw people in. If you wanted that reaction, you had to perform for the robot. So we'd have people kind of doing a dance in front of the robot, or trying to kind of keep its attention. And it's, you know, putting you in that position to kind of make explicit that there is this, you know, relationship going on, that we're kind of doing this. And the other versions of this robot had a head which could basically, it was a rear projection in the head, and it would make a kind of morph together all the faces that it could see around it. So the nearest person being the most alike. So if you were looking at it with a group of your friends, it would kind of merge all your faces together, and that would become the robot's face. So it was playing with this sort of ethical idea around what should robots look like, and would you prefer it if they look like the sort of people that you usually spend your time with, or your family, or something familiar? But there's a lot of ethical issues with that, and you know, like different and to do with diversity, which is an even more sort of significant issue. This robot is it's made of a mannequin, which is what they were doing at Hertfordshire anyway. But this is quite a strange kind of looking mannequin. It was actually meant to be a 13-year-old girl, but it looks like slightly male as well. So it has this sort of non-gendered thing going on, has the short hair. And we're really interested in that. We gave it a male voice, but certainly a semi-male name, Harry, with a 1 instead of an I. But yeah, this thing about the gendering and stuff like that. Anyway, I'll come on to that more in some other works later, but we would like to play with these ideas about what people want from robots. And we did events with older people. We did an event at Fabrica for Brighton Digital Festival, which it had people from sort of 60 years to into their sort of late 80s, I think, come and see the robot and come and have a debate about the future of AI and robotics and carer robots as well. And one of the performances we did with this robot was, because we were playing with this idea of carer robots, it would put its arm around you if you stood next to it. So we'd say to people, do you want to have your photo taken with the robot? We wouldn't tell them it would do this. And they would stand there next to the robot and we'd take the photo, and then the arm would come round. And we got this brilliant series of shocked faces. They're quite low resolution because it was a while ago, this thing. I think I took the photos on my phone, so they're terrible pictures, but we got their brilliant expressions on them because they're people going and all sorts of kind of faces that they pull when they're doing this, which is kind of incredible. And some people there was one guy who lives with the really strange looking robot and just worked with this robot called Casper, which is for helping children with autism to understand expressions, which is a well-known research project done by Kirsten Doughtenhahn at the University of Hertfordshire. And he just loved it. He just loved being hugged by this cold motorized robot. But other people, including a man from Microsoft, had the most horrified look on his face when the robot put his arm around him. So it's quite amusing. And from this group of elder people that we were presenting to, one of them said that she thought she would find it incredibly moving if she was feeling sad and Harry came and put its arm around her. So that was quite interesting. The other question I have to tell you, that the thing that they asked the most, they were like quite tentative, and they were like, excuse me, we heard that there are sex robots. Can you tell us more about that? And it's really interesting because the researchers sort of creating these kind of robots for older people would never think that that would be a feature that they would want. But from our impression, that was a feature they were very, very interested in. Because their partners might be dead or passed on and things like that. So, it's something that people don't think about, but by having the art kind of dialogue, those things can kind of come out. This is called antisocial swarm robots. These robots hate each other. They hate the pen that they're in, and they hate the audience. So they'll try and get away from everything. And they all run the same algorithm, which is basically avoiding everything. But through their behaviors, you get this kind of emergent property, and people will tell you that they like this one's in a bad mood, this one's, this one's the apex one, this is the leader robot, and all sorts of things. And so the idea of the work is that if we can't understand even this most basic algorithm that's avoidance, and we kind of anthropomorphize it and put all these other things on it, then how are we supposed to understand more complex AI and deep learning stuff? So we're kind of playing with those ideas, and people have compared them to kind of commuters running for a train, or animals and things. And it even got featured by I think the editor of the New Scientist, who said it was a kind of fantastic, what do you call it, when you sort of mimicking biomimicry, fantastic biomimicry of useless behavior, which is quite interesting. So there's that one. We've done works with scientists that kind of, this one is exploring deep brain stimulation with light to treat petit mal seizures in epilepsy. I won't go into too many details of it, but basically you have to kind of, they have they've done research where you can sort of genetically modify cells in the brain, which they're kind of exploring how they would do this in humans, but in animals they can genetically modify cells in the brain that when a UV light shine on them, a blue light shine on them, it resets the brain cells. So they used a lot of like deep learning stuff to recognize the pre-seizure state when it's starting to trigger, and then these lights trigger at the perfect moment to stop the seizure whilst not causing a seizure, because that's already quite fiddly. So the audience in this robot, it has this sort of exposed brain, and you have to have a blue light, and the audience are basically running around the installation, and every time the robot kind of collapses, they need to shine the light at the exact time. And it's sort of talking about how they need to do, how scientists have had to study this, and to highlight that this kind of treatment for this really debilitating condition, which causes slight increments in kind of damage to the brain over time, which can exacerbate it if it's not controlled. We've wanted to highlight how this is so important for future research, and that they're actually on the verge of, exploring how to do this in humans, not with the genetically modified brains. So don't worry about that. Our underwater robot, Archaeabot, it's a post-singularity, post-climate change life form. It's based on Archaea, which are some of the most ancient life forms on the planet. So this is based on one called Cephalobus acidocaldarius. Remember that, because there might be a test at the end. And these were found in the hot springs at Yellowstone Park, and they're considered to be like the oldest life that we know on the planet. And they're studying them, scientists are studying them, because they can swim about, and they have little tails that come off them, like in this kind of image that you can see there. And the little tails are driven by these tiny little cogwheel-like motors. So you've probably seen like images of E. coli bacteria that have these like cogwheel motors, and they swim around. You've probably seen pictures of bacteria. These are a bit like that, but they're much more simple. So the scientists we were collaborating with, because this is another project with Alex May, at Imperial College in London, on a project called MARA project, which was an EU funded project. They were looking at basically looking at cryo-electron microscopy of these motors to find exactly how they looked and were made and were powered to spin. And then they were designing them in DNA origami, which is a thing where you can basically fold DNA with staples in a certain way, and you can sculpt with it. So they were making these molecular robots, is what they aim to make, that instead of tails would have a drill bit, and you could put them on, say, a bacterium, and you could send them in the body, target them with sort of a protein or an enzyme that they need to look for, and then they could go into the body and drill holes in like bad cells that you don't want in the body. So you'd have to be, obviously it's quite futuristic, but they've got as far as building the motors out of the DNA origami. So it's, it's cutting edge stuff. It's futuristic, but it's really interesting. But these ancient life forms, these Cephalobus acidocaldarius, are very, very happy in hot temperatures. They're very happy at 60 degrees, 70 degrees, sometimes even as much as 80 degrees in these hot springs. And they're very happy with acid, like acid polluted waters from acid rain. So they're kind of like, if we had a very hot planet with a lot of acid rain and increased pollution like the way we're going now, then they would be very, very happy. So it's sort of making explicit this idea that, when we talk about saving the planet, we're not really talking about saving the planet, because the planet will be here and a lot of life forms will be here still and re-terraforming or whatever the planet, but humans it might not be so suitable for. So we were interested in this idea of this life form that could kind of express this future nanotechnology that they're working with, these kind of tiny motors and things like that, but also talk about this future kind of climate change situation and our fear of AI, or the sort of global fear. This was made a few years ago when everything about on the news about AI was, you know, Stephen Hawking says it's going to end the world, or could be a fantastic thing, but probably could be awful, and things like that. And all these kind of letters being bandied about, saying that you know, AI can be very, very dangerous, which obviously there are a lot of risks. And Alex May in particular has done a whole body of work about computer glitches that have caused quite major serious disasters and things like that. But so we were thinking about that, and thinking about this idea of a robot, because that's what they were talking about, molecular robots. So we made an underwater robot that has a neural network that can learn from its situation. So it's artificially intelligent. And what we wanted to do was play with this idea of uploading and say, well, maybe this is like the future of humanity. Maybe we could upload our consciousness in the future, with this idea of uploading that transhumanists are interested in. Upload our consciousness, and we would live on in these robot, sort of disembodied robot bodies with these tails spinning around. But if you link it back to the fact that your sensory input is really related to your kind of cognition and your consciousness, then it's not going to be a human anymore, which I guess is the point made in recent Doctor Who episodes about the Daleks. But anyway, I did this before that. And then I wanted to talk about, just sort of to conclude, spend a bit of time talking about this piece, this project that I did with Alex May again, and it was funded by the European Union STARTS programme, Science, Technology and the Arts it stands for. And we were awarded a residency with Schindler, who are one of the biggest engineering sort of companies in the world. They make a lot of elevators and walkways and escalators and things. I'm sure you've travelled on one of their devices. And, you know, actually, if you think about it, what's an elevator? It's a robot that you allow to eat you, basically, for a short time, or swallow you for a short time, and then it kind of spits you out again when you reach your destination. So they work a lot with robots, and they were also working at EPFL. They have a kind of new technologies team. So they have a new technologies team at EPFL in Lausanne, which is a, you know, very cutting edge university campus. And then they have one at their own head office, their HQ in Lucerne. And in Lausanne, they have like all these super fun toys you can play with. They've got drones and all sorts, and they've got these lovely Lumo robots, which I still really, really want. You can ride on them as well, but they will also follow you around and remember things, and they can recognize you, so they'll follow you, not somebody else, and so you can have your own sort of imprinted robot. So this is me sort of playing about there. And what they're interested in there was about robots for elevator maintenance, and they built this robot that will also drill lift shafts, because when you build a lift shaft, you need to drill all these bolts into it all the way up, and when you're getting to, you know, skyscraper levels, this is a hugely dangerous job. So they've actually built this robot that will crawl up the lift and drill the holes, because and they can do something like in a day or two to drill the holes for one lift shaft in a skyscraper, a job that would take a human months, and they can't build enough of these things in the timescale that they need, because they can't get enough workers, because it's not a very appealing job. So people want to do other jobs. So this is a good example of where robots are taking people's jobs, but they didn't want them. So and the people can do other jobs like repair robots, which is obviously going to be a growth industry in the future. And so we're very interested in the different technologies used, and what we decided we wanted to do was play with this idea of the delivery robot, because I read a lot of things about how there was an ambition to build, to have thousands of robots in thousands of cities around the world doing these deliveries all the time. And there's already been protest movements about reclaiming the pavements in certain cities where the delivery robots are already going quite a lot. So what about elderly people walking on the pavements? What about homeless people sitting on the pavements? You know, what happens to them when there are robots 24/7 coming up and down all the time on these pavements. So so it was quite an interesting thing. And then there's a whole area about what these robots look like. There's been security robots in the States that a company hired, an animal shelter hired, to patrol the pavement outside of their office, because the staff coming back at night with animals that they rescued found the homeless people nearby intimidating. Now, the idea that they've then hired robots to keep the homeless people away, I mean, ethically so complex and confusing and multi-layered and bizarre. Obviously, they got vandalized quite a lot. There's quite a lot of interesting pictures you can find on the internet and on YouTube of vandalized security robots. So we were interested in all these sort of things. And then what should robots look like? There was also another incident with a robot, a library robot, where everyone hated it. It was just sort of going around mindlessly. And then they stuck some googly eyes on it, and it became the mascot of the library. People go to the library to visit this robot now. It's like the most popular thing. So it's kind of completely strange when you think about these things. And so we had a lot of conversations with Schindler, who are looking a lot at future cities. How will we move about cities? How will goods move about cities? Do robots need a separate elevator, was one of the big questions that they were working on, because there's really strange behavior with robots in lifts. So if you get into a lift with a robot, the way it works now is people tend to back against the wall and give the robot a lot of room. But imagine if you're sort of fed up and you've like missed your meeting because you've been waiting for an elevator and a robot pushes in and you want to fit in. There's going to be a lot of jostling of robots once you get used to them. So there's this big difference of how we treat them now and how we're going to treat them and things. So they were talking about putting them into like a service elevator instead, that wouldn't have any decoration, it'd just be around the back. But there's also a thing like how you treat robots also says something, or some ethicists believe that says something about how we treat each other. So it's interesting to kind of think along those lines. So we decided to make a humanoid robot based on the scan of our previous robot, but 3D printed and much smaller. And it has body language. It does body language, basically. It will sense your body language and react to you. It uses a SLAM algorithm, it uses LiDAR and things like that, and it uses this quite complex body recognition algorithm, which you can see some of here that we were playing with. And this is like an early experiment with using the LiDAR. So this is a LiDAR robot that is basically doing a drawing around me. So and I'm lying on the floor in the Schindler New Technologies office here, and obviously they don't tend to have that many artists coming into the lab. So the idea that I would suddenly lie down on the floor and have a robot draw around me was a great shock to them, and they all ran in. What's wrong? What's wrong? And we're like, no, don't worry. The robot's doing a drawing of me. So we like to think about, how these technologies work, and just kind of going into all sorts of settings, like business settings and science settings and stuff, and just in a good way disrupting their kind of usual way of being. So I think that's quite a nice aspect of it. Working with Schindler, we were able to design the robot using their engineering tools and using some of their CAD tools and stuff, and they helped us all with that. So it was a fantastic experience, and we could have never made the robot in the same way with as much precision as we made. And so these are some of the lovely CAD drawings, and that's the finished robot. And it's one and only trip out, which is in last March. Not this year, but last year in March 2020 in Paris at Saint-Quatre, just before the COVID-19 pandemic really took hold. We were already getting the sort of wash your hands signs going up, but that was about it at that stage. So it was just the very beginning of March. And it's in this, it's at the Starts residency days there. And so the robot was able to be there and kind of interact with people and play with people. It's a bit penned in and a bit wired there, but that's not the plan for the real live showings of it, like the future showings in galleries. And we're in talks with a gallery, which I can't go into details of now, but would be a very nice show if that comes off. And we're also in talks, because we made Schindler always talk about digital twins as well. So they work a lot in the construction industry. And the way you do that is you make the building and then they make the digital twin of all the technology that goes into the building. So they can use that to diagnose like why this lift is not coming at the right floor or something like that. All these moving walkways and things like that are being all remotely diagnosed and sending data to the digital twin, like in airports and things like that. They just built a huge new thing at or their lifts they've got loads of lifts in Zurich new airport, so or new airport terminal. And so this is all diagnosed computationally. So we've made a digital twin of the robot as well. So some of those images that you could see are also gone into that. And it's still slightly a work in progress, but the idea is in this new exhibition that we might be able to have the digital twin in the elevator. So you can be interacting with the real robot, which will be free roaming, at least at some points, because it's got this self-balancing base and it can kind of float up to you and then interact with you and react to your body language and dialogue with you. And as you can see, it's got some other close-up photos and things. It's quite a small figure. It's got these sort of oversized clothes which make it look like it's kind of like a worker, the idea, and it's quite small, it's grey, it's quite insignificant, but also the colour grey was quite intentional because certain like colours are overused in robotics. Most robots are white, which is really weird thing. 80% of robots are white. And then other colors mean things if you choose them, and they've done studies to show this notion of shooter bias. I don't know if you know about this. It's like when you're kind of training, or it's sometimes in video games, it's like you have to save the old lady or the child crossing the road and you have to shoot the criminal. There's a thing called shooter bias where people tend to, or the people they've tested this on tend to shoot black people more than they do white people if they like tend to assume that they're a criminal in this, and that's obviously a very bad thing. They've tested it with robots and it still has the same kind of figures for it. So it's really interesting, and we need to kind of think about what color we make robots, because even like these things do affect people's attitudes and stuff. And when we left Schindler the second trip, their robot was multicolored, which it hadn't been before. It had been mostly white. And there's things like voices. The voices of robots. This robot doesn't have a voice. It works intentionally with body language to avoid that. It genders it. It gives it a class. It puts it in a certain ethnic group or whatever. So we wanted to avoid that as well. But you need to think about these things in order to avoid them. And then, as I said, the body is a teenage girl that kind of looks slightly male. So it's kind of non-gendered as well as what we're trying to go for. So that's the sort of the idea behind the work. And so this piece is called Cyber Species Proximity Robot, and that's what we were trying to investigate with it. It was like, how close can you get to a robot? How do you feel when robots touch you? Because it can touch as well, and it will respond to you. And how does that change your perception? We're artists, so we're not creating design solutions. What we are hoping to do is help the scientists and the technologists and the engineers, because it's Schindler's mainly engineers, to think more widely around the sort of the work that they're doing, and reflect on the ethical implications of it rather than just the engineering solution issues around it. So that's kind of the sort of the end of my talk, and I'm happy to take questions or discuss anything. Thank you. That's my contact details if you would like to get in touch. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for a fascinating talk about your practice there. Is really, and it's also, you know, the idea about how we do kind of have an emotional response. We put personalities on things, don't we? So let me have a look at the questions here. Yeah, we'll put the document in the chat at some point. So here we've got a question. Do you have any links with Ghislaine, I think that's how you say, Boddington, of Body Data Space,
Yes.
Some time ago, the person in the question said they worked with them on a major digital art project involving Masaki Fujiyata, and Ghislaine was great to work with.
Yes, yeah, I have worked with Ghislaine in well, the one version of the My Robot Companion, like the Harry robot with the face stealing, was shown in a show that they curated, which was about the future of work and robotics, which was a project by curated by Body Data Space. Yeah. And yeah, we're still in touch, and we were in touch again quite recently about various things. So yeah, absolutely, yes, they're excellent to work with, do lovely stuff. And also we showed the robot in Future Fest a few years back, and it was featured on some of their big posters as well, and Ghislaine Boddington curated that, so we worked together a few times.
Thank you. We've got, do you ever think that a robot could ever make art?
Well, yes, but whether it's creatively making art or whether it's making art, I mean, robots can obviously make art because we've got plotters and they make art, but whether you need an artist to be part of that process as well, like a human artist, that's another matter. I mean, it's a tricky one because like we don't actually have a good definition of creativity, for a computational definition of creativity that you could actually compute. So back to Turing, I mean, he came up with one of his famous papers is on computable numbers. So you need something has to be computable in order to compute it. Paul Brown, who's a friend of mine and a very pioneering artist in sort of artificial life, computational, a history of computer art and stuff like that. He did a project with Margaret Bowden, who wrote a famous book on kind of, I think it's called Creativity, Myths and Mechanisms, and where she tried to computationally define what creativity is. And they had a project, a big grant to build a robot that could draw and be creative. And they had a big team of philosophers on the project, and they couldn't agree what creativity was, because to make an artificially intelligent one, you need kind of a fitness function. So you need to know when if you're going to evolve a robot, you go through generations computationally of evolving the neurons, evolving the neural net to be able to do this stuff. But you need a fitness function, like I want it to be like this. And you have to lay down what that is for creativity, and no one could ever agree on that. So they ended up making it do fractals. So which obviously looks nice, and you might be happy with a kind of fractal based drawing artwork made by robot. I mean, it looked gorgeous in the exhibitions and things, but it was it's a bit of a cop out. And obviously there's some amazing AI artwork now, but it very much involves the artists in the kind of in the making of it. So I mean, particularly sort of a highlight of contemporary AI art is Anna Ridler's work, which I think with her project that she did with tulips, where she evolved this big data set of different tulips, and it's all to do with the price of Bitcoin and the price of tulips and tulip mania, and it's beautiful artwork, but it needs the artist kind of put together all those conceptual things. So it depends whether you want a visual thing, and whether and depends how deeply involved you want to get with the philosophy of what creativity might be to really answer that question. So to cut a long story short, maybe a computer could be creative, but you know, maybe biological computer, because we have those as well, and that's coming.
And there's some more comments coming through. Catherine's asking, as you're always looking to the future for better ways to do things, do you get frustrated with the speed of change in the now?
I mean, it's been amazing this year to see a lot of the work that, you know, I've been responding to over the years with genomics, the field of genomics, because I started working with modernizing medical microbiology in about 2010, and I've been working, and that was about implementing genomics research in diagnosis and treatment of infectious diseases. And like, because of all the work done for genomics over the past, 10, 15 years, that's what led to, things like vaccines being able to be produced so quickly. And a lot of the research and data that comes out, that would have taken, 30 years or more without the technologies that we have now. So, it is moving really fast in some areas and moving quite slowly in other areas. There's this saying, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. I mean, we've got, 3D printers, drones, robots in my house and things like that, but most people don't have all that. And they could, because they're not that expensive to have these things. You just need to know where you want to spend your money. But I mean, not everyone, obviously, because also I work a lot with global health. So I understand that, not everyone's in a privileged position to do that kind of stuff. But there's this thing where, I mean, the stuff they have at Schindler, it's just, I signed an NDA, so I can't tell you, but the incredible stuff that they're planning for future cities and stuff it's just amazing. I mean, their port technology, where you basically, your phone knows where you want to go, and as you walk past the doors, only the doors that you're allowed to go through on your route will open for you and things like that. And they have this running in buildings, so you can go in, you don't have to get your phone out, you don't have to do any ID, it's all being signaled to the building and the building's guiding you. I mean, that's pretty incredible stuff. They were also looking at things like hanging cities to prevent earthquakes, and elevators that were outside of buildings, just on kind of cables and stuff like that. It's really weird. So yes, I'm going to probably, to cut a long story short, yes, I would like it to all move much faster. And I want robots all around me. I really love robots. Not everyone does, but I think they're great.
We've got a couple more questions. One is around sex robotics taking a lead, and should other people keep an eye on what they are doing in terms of how robots interact, and not kind of like in terms of sexually interacting, but how we can kind of like build that robot human relationship, I suppose, in all aspects of life.
So what was the first bit of that?
Are sex robotics taking a lead? And should other people keep an eye on what they are doing in terms of how the robots interact with people?
So, I mean, they're not really taking a lead, I wouldn't say. It's a sort of still a niche area. I think it is quite popular. I mean, pornography has driven the development of the internet, and a lot of technologies that are on the internet is either sex or money. So that's why we have blockchain things, is all to do with the money side and scarcity and things like that. And then the sex robots on the other side. But I mean, what they're kind of looking at, some of the sex robots are kind of trying to give them personalities. So there was one where they could kind of download the football scores and talk to you about that as well, which all seems very bizarre and things. I find them quite amusing, but not in that way. And so I don't think they're really taking over. I mean, don't forget that the sex robots we think of are all all these sort of large-breasted female style robots, but actually women have been using sex robots for a very long time, since the sort of Victorian era, if you think about it. I won't go into any more details. Also, they're pocket size, so there's that to bear in mind. So these kind of technologies have been out there for a long time in different ways. I think like there are certain things that are kind of taboo to talk about, and that's why it was interesting talking with the older people about like realizing that was a big interest of them, and that's something that is a sort of taboo subject. You don't talk about like older ladies and elderly ladies and sex, and that's not something people like to think about, but it's something that they might want, and they might have the money to buy. So it's something that could be good. And in terms of keep an eye on what they're doing in terms of how robots, I mean, yeah, all the research is on how robots interact with humans. It's a huge a huge area. Like, what do we want? What do we want them to look like? How close can they get to us? How can they touch us? How do we feel about that? Like, if you build a robot that's taller than the average human, they find that very intimidating. Or if it's just slightly tall, like if they're a bit taller than you, you get this sense it's the sort of robot overlord. And there was an artist whose name I've forgotten, who built a very large, tall robot that was, you know, playing with this. It was just a normal behavior, but the size of the robot is you know, was really affecting how people interacted with it. So I think there's a huge amount of research. Maybe not a lot of it gets out to the public, but you know, it's there in the fun, like theme parks as well. There's so much robotics in theme parks. Sometimes I go to Disneyland and then put it through as a tax deduction. Don't tell, no, just joking. But I could do, because it's like there, you go there and you can just look at the amazing technology that they're using and how they're using it. And that's really interesting. You can learn a lot from going to theme parks.
There's a question here, and then we'll close the questions on this, and then we'll have a plenary about the whole things we've been talking about. A question, well, comment really, is about interesting here to see the role of creatives as catalyzers for cultural values and human understanding, juxtaposed with artificial intelligence reflecting, shaping our technologies. So, you know, having that artistic is the human that's working with the robots, I think is actually quite an interesting juxtaposition, and kind of giving an artistic, in a way, algorithm, I suppose, is really interesting. I don't know if you've got anything comment to say on that one.
I mean, it's sort of summed up in
it's in the, yeah, so just
in the comment, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say on that. Yeah, I think it's sort of saying, you know, what I was kind of alluding to anyway, to an extent.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for your time today. I think if we go right back to the morning where we were looking at the different ways we could see industry, creativity and culture as almost a philosophy for enterprise, then through to Akin's talk about being multidisciplinary and kind of thinking of ourselves as multi-specialists rather than just doing one thing. A lot of the things about idea synthesis, about youth has come through quite a lot of the talks today. And then through into the idea about how we can work at the juncture of agriculture and farming and bring dialogues together. And I think for me, I was looking through the notes I've made, it'd be interesting if everybody's got comments to say. I think for me, the whole thing that has come out of this knowledge exchange is actually about dialogues. So I'm really, because knowledge exchange is about dialogues, I'm really pleased that that's been an outcome from it. But if anybody else has got any comments they want to say about what they think about today's talks, and it would be fascinating just to put them in the chat before we call a close on the day. But I just want to, before we go, say thanks to all our speakers, my colleagues in the Ideas Factory, for working on this. It's been really, really interesting day, and hopefully we'll be able to keep these dialogues going. Because you've attended, you do have the recording, so you can pick up the contact details of the speakers there. And it'd be really, really nice to see you all again and to keep these dialogues going for how we can kind of create a positive future. And to remember that comment I made at the beginning, out of crisis, we usually find some form of opportunity. So I'm really, really interested in how we can keep going. So some great comments there. So for you, Anna, as well. So thank you, Anna, such interesting work. Very inspiring. So yeah, lovely. So everybody, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have another one of these sessions pretty soon. Be very interested to hear your thoughts about what you'd like in our knowledge exchange programs, and also to remember that we do have the internship program as part of this initiative that we talked as well. Oh yeah, sorry about New York City. Yeah, the timings aren't great. Hopefully you'll have a really nice day though, now that you've had to get up so early. I do apologize, Anita. Thank you, everybody. See you all soon. Thank you. Bye.